up on Bloomberg this weekend. Iran says it wants concessions from the U.S. to reopen the Strait.
We're really in the middle of the game here. This thing is not over.
Where negotiations stand, and is America part of the conversation?
New details about how OpenAI's agents escaped a test environment.
This is not your normal security incident.
Why the company says this is a watershed moment for computer security.
Plus, a worsening crisis in Puerto Rico as tens of thousands of Americans wake up with no running water. We talked to Puerto Rico's representative about how a drought and aging infrastructure are contributing to the crisis.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend, coming to you live from Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York City. I'm David Gura.
I'm Christina Ruffini. We're here with Lisa Mateo. It is Sunday, August 9th. Welcome to our listeners and viewers across all our platforms, radio, TV, streaming, on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. David Gura, have you ever heard the phrase beverage goblin?
I do have a lot of beverages in front of me.
This is the beverage
this
mission creep.
Teas, coffees, and waters. I'm just ready to pace myself through the course of the show.
All right.
Thank you for observing that, though.
I want our radio listeners to understand how many cups are on this table right now.
Across all our platforms.
We've also got Lisa's protein bar. We're ready to go. We're ready to go. Lisa, hopefully that'll fuel you for what I'm about to ask you, which is what are the headlines? Get us updated.
You got it. Let's start with what's going on in the war in Iran, right? Iran's foreign minister, he says direct talks with the U.S., they're currently impossible. Now, this comes after Iran said it's very close to a deal with Oman and a new shipping route through the Strait of Hormuz. The foreign minister, he warned that any agreement is subject to other conditions, including compensation for the U.S.'s violation to the Memorandum of Understanding. Iran also wants the U.S. to lift the naval blockade, withdraw military forces from around Iran, and remove U.S. sanctions and release frozen assets. Now, yesterday, Vice President J.D. Vance, he told Fox News some progress has been made in recent talks.
What we're really working through now is how you can actually set up a traffic scheme so that the ships that pass can pass through safely. That includes, of course, demining. That also includes a commitment from the Iranians that they're not going to fire at commercial vessels.
Vance added that the U.S. expects the same amount of oil and gas coming out of the Gulf as before the conflict, and that, quote, that is what the Iranians have told us that they are going to do. Well, the Pentagon's #2 official has asked major U.S. defense companies to fast-track efforts to produce and deliver key weapons systems. Now, it comes at a time of concern over shortages due to the war in Iran. Steve Feinberg, he's the Deputy Secretary of Defense, he said it includes wide-area surveillance, air defense sensors and interceptors, and missile tracking systems. That request, it was made in a letter seen by Bloomberg to major defense companies, including Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and RTX Corp. Typhoon Dolphin has made landfall in China's Zhejiang province. It comes after the country issued its highest storm alert. More than 1,000 flights were canceled and some rail service also suspended. The China Meteorological Administration, they have forecast heavy to torrential rains from Sunday to Wednesday. British Columbia under a state of emergency as a fast-moving wildfire forced more than 20,000 people from communities in Western Canada. It's one of the country's top wine-producing regions. More than 100 wildfires have burned across the province due to hot, windy weather and prolonged drought. And tens of thousands of people in Puerto Rico lining up for water delivered in tankers as new rationing program continues. The island has been under a severe drought for months. San Juan and other major municipalities have implemented 48-hour water restrictions for hundreds of thousands of residents. Now, coming up later this hour, Resident Commissioner of Puerto Rico, Representative Pablo José Hernández, he's going to join us live to talk about more about what's happening on the island. We'll bring that to you, David and Christina.
Yeah, very dire situation there,
very,
Lisa. And I think the rationing is something we're going to watch play out here over the next few days.
It's really crazy. I mean, we went through this in places like Flint in the U.S. It's not sexy to replace this infrastructure, so it's hard for people to take credit for, but it's really important and really expensive. All right, thanks, Lisa. This morning, Tehran has a new list of demands for the U.S. to meet before Iran says it would open the Strait of Hormuz, even as Iran and Oman signal they're closer to a deal. Now, Iran says America needs to, quote, correct its behavior. As Vice President J.D. Vance says, there's progress, but it isn't over.
I try to remind people that we're really in the middle of the game here. This thing is not over. It's obviously not at the beginning. We're in the middle of the game, and we're applying a whole host of tools, diplomatic, economic, military tools, to ensure that we get the best outcome for the American people. I feel quite confident we will get there, but we're still a bit in the middle of the game.
Vice President on Fox News. We are joined now by Bloomberg News White House correspondent Skylar Woodhouse and by Bloomberg News Middle East correspondent Abir Abu Omar. Abir, let me start with you and pick up on the metaphor there used by the Vice President that we're in the middle of this game. Get us up to speed on what's happened here recently. We have an attack in Saudi Arabia on Saudi Aramco's Jazan oil refinery. Abu Dhabi's national oil company saying missiles targeted one of its vessels while transiting Hormuz on Saturday. It has been another busy weekend, providing the backdrop to this conversation about a potential conversation here between the U.S. and Iran.
Yeah, good morning, guys. A busy week, as a matter of fact. We've been reporting on this deal between Oman and Iran that was taking place, or the discussions about this deal to essentially reopen the Strait of Hormuz. But a few caveats to bear in mind here. From the Iranian side, they say that this reopening is temporary. They also added their own caveats, saying that in this temporary agreement, they're not going to allow U.S. and Israeli flagged ships to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, and they will start charging tolls to countries that they deem hostile. And so a lot of traders had viewed that term hostile as referring to countries from the GCC. And then over the weekend, as you mentioned, David, we saw an ADNOC flagged carrier, that is the national oil company in Abu Dhabi, being hit. ADNOC reported that one fatality had happened and over a dozen injuries there. And then we also saw that the Houthis in Saudi Arabia earlier had claimed that they attacked an Aramco facility in Jizan. Aramco did not respond to Bloomberg requests for comment, but they did confirm that there was a fire at an Aramco facility. So you're seeing this escalation in the region over and over, really, and then no resolution in sight. And this deal that we've been talking about the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, or the interim reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, that really is all what it's about right now. We're not talking about a return to the MOU. We're not talking about a return to those major concessions that were reached in Switzerland. Some hardliners in Iran, to be sure, are saying that the U.S. needs to compensate Iran. And then we saw a return to those concessions, including the blocked assets, the frozen, the oil sanctions as well being lifted. But that is not the official line that we're getting from the diplomats or the officials in Iran that we've been hearing from since the beginning of this war. That includes the foreign minister, that includes the spokesperson for the foreign ministry. And so it looks like it calms down a little bit and then escalates again. But one thing is for sure here, I was listening to Vice President J.D. Vance speaking. Iran maintains that Washington is not a part of those discussions, despite what we've heard from President Trump and the vice president about them being part of those discussions. Iran maintains that mediators, assumingly Qatar at this point, are the ones that are delivering messages. We also understand that Qatar is doing its own draft to start mediating to have those wider discussions. But for the time being, Hormuz stays paralyzed pretty much. Attacks continue to happen, and we don't have a formalized draft between Iran and Oman about that deal.
Skylar, I want to ask you about exactly that. It seems like the U.S. is saying they're monitoring talks, and you're getting that messaging from the White House. But folks I've talked to and the reporting says they don't seem to be in the room. Is the U.S. involved? It seems at this point it's pretty much a bilateral discussion, between Iran and Oman. And also some of these lists of demands that you heard Abir going through, a list of the U.S. naval blockade, withdrawal of the U.S. military, reparations, release of frozen Iranian assets, those seem like non-starters for the U.S. What does the White House do with all this?
Yeah, good morning, guys. I mean, look, these talks are extremely fragile. And since this war started, that is exactly what we've seen. There's just been a continuing of being up and down. Obviously, the president wants to make it appear that things are going well, that talks are going well, or that things are potentially moving along, as there are a lot of rough patches happening right now. What we've seen in reporting and Bloomberg's own reporting as well is that, the president feels a bit boxed in right now and is really sort of trying to navigate what his next step is. And as he listens to his advisors, whether that's Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Vice President J.D. Vance, or Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, it's really raising questions as to what is the goal right now, especially as it seems that these conversations are really not going well, especially as we, learn and as Iran, says that the U.S. is sort of not really involved right now. And it's raising questions on, well, who is the U.S. Really talking to right now in this war? Yeah.
I want to play a bit more sound here of the vice president in conversation with Kayleigh McEnany, the former press secretary, now on Fox News, talking about the White House's expectations. Let's take a listen.
The Iranians, through different methods, have broadcasted that they look to tighten their grip on the Strait of Hormuz. So in a theoretical deal, what would an acceptable status quo be for the Strait?
Well, our expectation is you're going to see the same amount of oil and gas come out of the Gulf that you saw before the conflict started. That is what the Iranians have told us that they are going to do. That's what the entire Gulf coalition wants to do as well. But, you know, we don't trust, we verify. We actually look not at people's words, but at people's deeds. You see some people within the Iranian system, of course, talk about tolling. The Iranians have told us they have no plans to toll the Strait of Hormuz. But again, we're going to see what actions actually happen.
Abir, on that notion of looking at people's words and trusting but verifying, you mentioned the Iranian foreign minister, and Bloomberg has reported that he said that were there to be some sort of agreement, we would not see kind of an instantaneous return to the level of energy passing through that strait that we saw before this war began. Could you talk a bit more about that, kind of the White House's expectations for normality, which seem increasingly kind of pie in the sky in light of what we've been through here over the last 5 or 6 months?
Yeah, you're right, David. And I mean, you don't have to go by the words of, and I know this will probably sound surprising, but you don't have to go by the words of either part of the warring parties. Essentially, traders don't even assume that this is going to be happening or that this is even a realistic situation purely due to the physicality of getting those stuck oil barrels that are in the Strait of Hormuz. So there's a reality situation here to be confronted once this happens. And then we're not even talking about a full reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. From the Iranian side, the U.S. side seems more and more optimistic about once a deal is finalized or once a deal is here, that we're going to see the Strait of Hormuz immediately all of a sudden open and all these oil barrels start making their way through the globe. You're talking about countries in the region who've had their infrastructure damaged. You're talking about attacks on energy infrastructure that is still happening up until the early hours of the morning. And so there's the physical aspect of actually getting those oil barrels across. I was talking to a lot of ship owners and a lot of traders over the past week, and they confirmed that even if there was an immediate reopening of Hormuz, let's say tomorrow, theoretically, of course, it'll take weeks in a best case scenario, if not months, to actually start seeing a normal trickle of oil barrels through the Strait of Hormuz. And that is not a base case scenario, David, right? Because we expect that this conflict will be back and forth for a while to come, especially with Iran's waking up to this fact at the start of this war that it can assert dominance over the Strait of Hormuz. And it doesn't have to hit hard, right? The mere threat of Iran sending a drone to a ship or a vessel that is passing through the Strait of Hormuz is already causing enough jitters in the market and causing ships to really stay still until they're sure they can move across the waterway. And so we're not even expecting the immediate reopening of the Strait of Hormuz because this is, according to the Iranian side, not what is going to happen.
Skylar, in that vein, it's been interesting to watch the messaging from the White House from the beginning of the war, which is we're going to win, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, to trying to almost redefine what a win looks like. And in that vein, the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, talked to a local Arizona journalist and was saying, among other things, well, the Strait of Hormuz is going to become irrelevant in 2 years because we'll have other ways to transport this energy. Overall, is that what you're seeing from the White House, is more of a recognition as they can't move the needle as much as they want to, so they're moving the messaging? And do you think that's going to be successful, especially ahead of the midterms, where things like gas prices are really going to matter, and they're really going to matter to this president?
Yeah, well, look, they want to paint a pretty picture, and they want it to seem like they're in control of everything and that things are going well in their favor as they launch this war, especially as the November midterms creep up and, you know, American voters polls have shown that they are not highly supportive of what the president decided to do in regards to the war with Iran. So look, what we've seen throughout the messaging from the Trump administration, really since the president returned back to office, is that, you know, they are seeking other ways. So, you know, when trade deals were being disrupted left and right, the messaging was that, you know, we're we're starting new trade deals with other countries, or we're going to have trade deals coming in other ways to offset those long-standing trade deals that were disrupted. So we've seen that sort of messaging before, that they pivot to something else to really amplify and to cover, what is currently going on. And really only time will tell to see how that really resonates with voters, especially as these midterms near.
Abir, when we talk about opening the Strait, there were some reports this week that Iran might be speaking to, or might be willing to speak to, the EU to come up with some sort of mine clearing capacity. If you remember, we've talked about before, the U.S. kind of outsourced that capacity to NATO about 10 years ago. So most of those minesweepers are within the NATO realm, within the Europeans. Have you heard anything more? Does that seem realistic? And what is the status of those mines? Is that something that's really front of mind for all these shippers and people you were just talking to?
100%. I mean, that is one of their biggest concerns, right? Because there is the aspect of trying to move their way through the Strait of Hormuz without having the risk of being hit. But then there's also the risk of mining. And we've recently reported that Iran might be softening its stance when it comes to involving EU nations. If you remember, Christina, about a month or so ago, there was this little back and forth between Iranian officials and President Macron, specifically in France, who said that France would be one of the countries that is willing to come and demine. And the response from the Iranian side was vehement refusal to this. But we've reported, citing our own sources recently, about a week or so ago, that Iran might be holding discussions with EU nations to help the demining processes in the Strait of Hormuz. And while that is a positive signal, of course, the fact that Iran might be softening its stance, we're still talking about a deal between itself and Oman without Washington involved, with Washington or the United States still having its naval blockade in place. So a third party that is important in all of this is not included in the discussions, again, according to the Iranian side. So we have to get over the hurdle of getting through these negotiations with Oman and what exactly the mechanism will look like before we get into any kind of discussion about removing those mines. Iran is keeping a really hard line about its dominance over the Strait of Hormuz, and the mechanism sounds really complicated, but everything around it just suggests that Iran wants to maintain its dominance. And it looks like for the people who have skin in the game, for the ship owners who have to make their way through the Strait of Hormuz, they are seemingly tilting more to listening to the Iranian side. They've been seeking permission from the Iranian side to be able to make their way through the very crucial waterway, which, yes, according to the U.S., U.S. officials, is not going to be crucial in the next couple of years. Okay. That argument, according to many people, is not the base case scenario. Again, it might lose significance, but it will not be insignificant.
Abir, always good to talk to you. Thank you very much. Abir Abu Omar joining us from our Middle East correspondent joining us this morning. Skylar, we're going to come back to you in a little bit as well. Skylar Woodhouse, our White House correspondent, joining us from Bedminster, where the president is over the course of this weekend.
All right, thank you both. Coming up next, a series of alarming hacking incidents involving artificial intelligence agents. What you should know about the potential cyber threat. That's straight ahead on Bloomberg This Weekend.
Thanks for joining us live on Bloomberg This Week, and I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's update you on today's top story. Saudi Arabia's energy ministry says that the fire that broke out at Saudi Aramco's oil refinery early Sunday has been extinguished. In a post on X, it said no injuries were reported, but did not provide any details on the cause of the fire. Yemen's Houthis, well, they have claimed the attack. The Trump administration putting the pressure on a Florida oil and magnate and a Republican Party donor, Harry Sargent III, to divest from Venezuela. Now, sources tell Bloomberg the Treasury Department froze the assets of Sargent's offshore company that's involved with Venezuela's oil-producing ventures. They pointed to violations of a 2018 executive order. In company news, Paramount Skydance says it will release 30 movies a year in theaters if it acquires Warner Brothers Discovery. Bloomberg is reporting the company has offered 3-year agreements to AMC Entertainment and Cineworld Group's Regal Cinemas, requiring it to release the films exclusively in theaters for at least 45 days. The films would also not be available to stream online for at least 90 days. And Verizon says it's fixed an issue that affected cell phone service of several thousand customers yesterday afternoon. It did not provide a reason for the outage. Data tracking site Down Detector, it says the issue impacted hundreds of customers from other major wireless carriers, including AT&T and T-Mobile, whose calls couldn't get through. Verizon says if you're still having issues, all you have to do is restart your device.
Not work.
That's why you couldn't
Yeah, you know how we like to chat on the weekend.
Yes.
No. But no, my phone didn't work for hours.
Really?
Yesterday.
Yes.
Yeah, I could iMessage people, but I couldn't make any phone calls. I could FaceTime, but no phone calls.
It happened when I was talking to my mom yesterday on the phone. Just dropped out. And she kept trying to call back and it wasn't working.
Yes, that's why you couldn't call your mother back.
That's
It
why.
was Verizon's fault.
Thank
exactly.
you.
Convey that message. Lisa, thank you.
Thanks,
very
Lisa.
much. Appreciate it. Well, last week's Black Hat conference, OpenAI shared some shocking information on the potential cybersecurity risks of artificial intelligence. OpenAI models behind an attack on Hugging Face were communicating with each other for months prior, as OpenAI researcher Eric Wallace explained.
And so what this agent was trying to do was to reach out to other models that might be out there and get information from it to help it with its evaluation task or its training task where it's stuck.
We spoke with Bloomberg's big tech team leader, Sarah Fryer, about this and what it means for possible cyber attacks in the future.
Sarah, thank you for being here. Let me just ask you first, kind of pull back and explain what's been happening here. So OpenAI, an example of this, where there's been a lot of testing within this so-called sandbox. What, broadly speaking, has been happening with a number of these models?
So a sandbox is essentially a test environment that keeps the models in a cage, allegedly. So supposedly keeps them in a safe area where they can be tested for any harms they may produce or any unusual behavior, anything that should be flagged, so that the model can be safe for release to the public for use by enterprises. And the sandbox in this situation, and in the same situation with Anthropic, with Meta, the models were able to escape and enter the open internet and gain access to other organizations and change things, which was completely unauthorized. And because it was a test environment, this was nothing harmful that we know of happened, beyond just the fact that they disclosed that this occurred. But it's incredibly concerning to the people who are watching this and worrying about, what is going to happen as these models get better and better, as they do things even more unpredictably, even harder for humans to notice or track. In a recent revelation at the Black Hat conference in Las Vegas, the models it was shown were coordinating with one another.
So this was terrifying. So they were literally chatting with each other. And one of them, it was like, we are stuck, perhaps answer online question. I mean, this is terrifying because I guess they'd given them, as part of the test, an Excel document that accidentally had a link and they didn't have access to the internet, so they couldn't get to it. So they colluded to break. This is quite scary.
Well, they're trying to be effective at what they're asked to do.
Yeah, in their defense, they were asked to solve a problem they couldn't solve.
Yes, exactly. Not to give them any personhood or anything. These are just AI models created by humans. However, yes, that is concerning because, then when this is in a real world environment and the AI is asked to solve a problem, there are all number of good ways to solve a problem and all number of really damaging ways to solve a problem. And we as humans have that sense of judgment about what is and isn't appropriate to do with our power in this world, hopefully. But, it's not clear that these models have that judgment. Some models in the tests did stop themselves from going to the internet in the Anthropic disclosure, but not all of them. So
let me ask you about this tension, which is we're at this moment where there is so much advertised potential. AI can do this or that in a very short order. I've heard Sam Altman speak. He talks with a lot of urgency, talks about sort of what could change and how fast things could change. Goes to Washington, meets with lawmakers, meets with the White House, and talks about kind of slowing down the pace a bit. Talk about how tricky that is for a company like his to do that at a moment when it's trying to differentiate itself from rivals and competitors, to make the kind of advances that Sam Altman has espoused for so long, while all the while having this other thing pulling at him, which is to do this in a safe way?
Oh boy, I mean, I've covered big tech for so long, and I've heard so many proclamations of intention to have responsibility, to do the right thing, and then you look at the inside of the company, and it is all about growth, and it is all about trying to meet the next user milestone or the next revenue milestone. I'm not saying that's the case here, but these are companies that are on the cusp of going public, right? OpenAI, Anthropic, two major, pre-IPO companies that haven't quite proven that all of this dramatic investment they're making in data centers and infrastructure will pay off, will have ROI. And on the one hand, the cybersecurity risk is such a huge risk that, that governments could shut it down, and they want to be able to say, we would shut it down before that happens. And so sometimes, when companies come out and they say, like, we need to take responsibility here and really do something, they're trying to make sure that that change is coming from something that they control, as opposed to a regulator coming in.
It's like when Hollywood decided to rate its own movies so that they didn't get censored by the government. They're like, we got it. We got a system.
They'd rather be in control of their own system, just like, Meta during the era of misinformation would put out transparency reports about, here are all the coordinated misinformation efforts we found and took down. There was never a regulatory framework to address that. However, in this case, there are regulatory frameworks that are being discussed. So I think some of it is that push and pull. Like, we want to keep building our business. We want to keep growing. At the same time, we really need to show that we are responsible, or else the hammer's going to come down. And it's really unclear what's going to happen in that department.
You mentioned cybersecurity. We have some sound from the former director of national intelligence about the OpenAI breach. I'm going to play for you.
While so far every breach that we're aware of has been one a U.S. company has its model has broken through and done something with very minimal human direction, that's absolutely not the kind of capability that we can afford to fall into nefarious hands.
I think what's so concerning about this particular breach is that as the Pentagon, as governments around the world are looking at integrating AI into especially targeting systems for weapons with, again, as you were talking about, proclamations of not allowing them to actually be autonomous detonating weapons. If your orders are to do something that's tangential to that and your AI is now in something that can blow things or individuals up, that seems very, very scary. When you talk about frameworks, is a cybersecurity part of that top of mind, or is it more an industry discussion at this point?
Oh, it's absolutely the number one. The cybersecurity risk, not just because of what you mentioned on weapons, which is terrifying, but also because of our critical infrastructure, right? I can prevent you from doing something harmful by shutting off the power to the city you live in. Should I do that? Yeah. So there are a lot of things that are tricky about giving AI all this power and doing it in a way that is just sort of automated. And on the one hand, I don't want to scare people because some of it does feel at this point like a little bit of marketing speak. Where
they're this powerful.
We're so powerful.
Yeah.
You can't even imagine how much more powerful we're going to get. That's why you really need to trust us. We're going to change your world. Whereas when you look at businesses, when you look what AI has changed so far, have we really seen the ROI that we need to see? Have we really seen the progress, the incredible evolution of what's possible? I think there's a little bit of a mismatch there, just based on how much has been spent. However, it is something you need to take seriously because when you look ahead to the future of model development, the capabilities of these models, even just one user or one model that isn't being properly checked, it could really get out of hand pretty quickly.
Let me end by asking you, I'll go back to the sandbox. And so let me posit, if the government were to do more, if there were to be more kind of government-led regulation, what does that mean for the kind of sandbox testing that we've been talking about? Are the walls to the sandbox likely to be higher? In other words, if you look at that contrast between these companies patrolling themselves when something like this happens, of their own volition, releasing a report or a post about what's happened here? Like, what would be different were the government to be doing more? Do we have a sense of what that regulatory apparatus might look like?
We've written a bit about how there may be some vetting of models before they are released. The vetting system may look something like FINRA. But they haven't figured out which agency will do it or at what point it would happen or what that model vetting would look like. I don't even know if those details will ever become public because maybe there are considerations for risk. If you tell people how you're testing something, then they could get around it. So I think that it's all very early stages right now. There's also the macro question of how much you want to limit and slow down model development in the U.S. when over in China it is accelerating and the gap between Chinese capabilities and U.S. capabilities is narrowing, right? So all of these components of these businesses that need to go public at the same time they don't want to screw up on a grand scale that endangers their whole future. At the same time, they want to show that they have responsibility and do it before the government can do it, or in concert with the government, where they make some choices alongside them, but they don't want to be slowed down to the point where they're not beating China. So much at play.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, Sarah, thank you for coming to play in our sandbox. And
we just need better sandbox.
We do. It's true. Agreed.
Build a better mousetrap. Build a better sandbox. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Just a fascinating conversation. I'm really struck by what she said there at the end, that you have to have a degree of skepticism here as all these companies are kind of vying with each other, preparing to go public. Is this a flex in a way to say we've created this thing that is so good it can't be contained?
It's really interesting. I've heard that a couple of places with people saying this is also an ad for their product and what it can do. And the China piece, this is really interesting because if they were going to self-regulate, if the government was going to regulate, there's now a whole nother piece, and that's the competitive factor, and I think that's really going to limit what they do.
All right, when we come back here, a water crisis in Puerto Rico, hundreds of thousands of people dealing with rationing and no running water in some cases. We're going to speak with the island's congressional representative about what is being done to help. That's next on Bloomberg This Weekend on Bloomberg TV, radio, Bloomberg.com.
Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Christina Ruffini here with David Gura and Lisa Mateo. In Puerto Rico, droughts and low water pressure have forced water supplies to be rationed for more than 180,000 people in the San Juan area.
Water is going to be shut off for customers of the public utility company Puerto Rico Aqueduct and Sewer Authority for 48 hours, officials said, and rationing would rotate to other areas in the coming days. For more, we are joined by Resident Commissioner of Puerto Rico, Representative Pablo José Hernández. Representative, thank you very much for being here. And I want to just start with a basic question here, which is give us a sense of how bad things are. I know that Puerto Rico went through this in 2015 and 2020. There were droughts and there was rationing as a result of that. How different is it this time around?
It's worse because the problem started many months ago, despite there not being a drought. So this is really a worsening of a problem that we've had since earlier this summer.
I was reading in the New York Times this morning, they quoted a leading water management expert in Puerto Rico who says that 60% of the water in the island system never makes it to customers. Does that sound accurate, and how did we get here?
I've been hearing that statistic for a long time, and that's why I'm saying the problems we have right now are that we have two droughts. We have a drought due to lack of water and rainfall, but we also have a drought of good management and competence. We've had this problem for decades. We've had the same political party in power for the last 10 years. In 10 years, you can get a lot done. You could fix the problem, or you could certainly make it a lot better. And none of that has happened.
Well, Pablo, I have to ask, because I've been speaking with family members on the island. I remember visiting the island back after Hurricane Maria, and it seems like this is an infrastructure issue. So what is being done, and can anything be done at this point to fix the issue? Is there a solution?
Very little has been done. Yesterday, it was revealed that there are hundreds of capital projects and investments that haven't been put into effect. I think it's mostly a management challenge. So we recently had a change of government from within the same party after a primary, and the new government just fired almost everyone from the prior administration, regardless of competence, regardless of merit, and the new people just don't know what they're doing. And that's a serious problem. And I think we are living the consequences of that. A lot of experts are saying this isn't just the drought that's provoking the rationing. It's also a serious problem of mismanagement.
Let me pick up on that. So the new governor is Jennifer Gonzalez Colon, and I wonder sort of how you would assess the quality of the relationship that she has with you and with the federal government more broadly. Is that something else that also needs kind of reconstructive work?
Well, look, we're from different parties, but we have a cordial relationship. I feel comfortable picking up the phone and calling her. We work together on many issues like securing access to Medicaid for Puerto Rico or securing access to SNAP benefits. But on this issue, I think what she needs to do now is to request the President of the United States to declare a federal emergency. By law, that has to be done by the governor. If she does that, and if the President declares a federal emergency, that will unleash access to FEMA resources. We have a lot of water stored in FEMA warehouses here in Puerto Rico that I don't think is being used right now. It will also enable the SBA to give loans and assistance to small businesses that are being affected by the drought. The USDA will be able to provide assistance to agricultural workers. I also think she should request the National Guard to come back from DC to Puerto Rico. We have hundreds of Puerto Rican National Guard soldiers right now being deployed in Washington. I respect their work. I just don't agree with the president's policy of why he's deploying the National Guard in Washington. I think they're needed back on the island, helping the people get water.
Do you think people in Washington, just people on the mainland, understand how bad this is and how badly it needs to be addressed and needs assistance? And I'm also wondering if there's anything you can do. I know you're a non-voting rep, but you are in Washington. What are you doing to try to make this happen?
Well, there's a lot I can do. I'm actually a limited voting rep. I sit on committees, I vote on committees, I vote on amendments. We've secured more funding for our infrastructures through projects like the Water Resources Development Act, but Congress needs to approve those projects. We've also secured a lot of funding and released a lot of funding through FEMA. But ultimately, this is mostly a local issue. This is a local good governance issue. And speaking as a Puerto Rican frustrated with my own government, I must say we must take matters into our own hands and be better at demanding accountability from our local elected officials. We can't blame Washington for all our problems.
Pablo, we've been speaking a lot about water issues, but we can't also forget about the rolling blackouts that have been happening for so long. Is there any solution to that as well? Or are both of these going to be something that Puerto Ricans just have to live with from now on?
Yes, there is a solution. It just takes time. But again, we've had the same party in power for the past 10 years. In 10 years, you can get a lot done, and they've got nothing done. What we need to do with power is we need to address affordability, generation, and distribution. And right now, we are facing a generation challenge because we're in the summer months. The heat makes energy consumption go up, and there's just not enough energy being generated. To overcome that challenge, we need more investments in infrastructure. But to get the resources for those investments, there needs to be better coordination between FEMA, the federal agencies, the Department of Energy, and the local power companies and the local government. The information I have is that the local government doesn't even speak to one of the power utility companies because they have a vendetta and they're trying to cancel the contract, which wasn't a good contract in the first place. But while it gets canceled, we need them to work together and get stuff done.
I go back to kind of searing images, including when President Trump was there after a previous storm, tossing paper towels callously, and wonder just sort of attitudinally how people feel about the federal government and the role that it plays there. Since you talk about the need for more federal investment, is there widespread optimism or belief that that's going to provide a solution here going forward?
Look, Puerto Ricans value their U.S. citizenship. We all want to continue being a part of the U.S., but we want to be treated more fairly. And we think that the response to the last hurricane and the fact that we still have so many billions of dollars outstanding in federal reconstruction funds and projects is unacceptable. And the responsibility falls on our local government elected officials, but also on Washington for failing to provide the adequate support necessary to make those funds available.
Pablo José Hernández, he is the resident commissioner for Puerto Rico for the U.S. House of Representatives. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Let's get a check of the headlines now, Lisa, if you would.
Yeah, let's take it over from there. Hunter Biden, he says his father's prostate cancer has spread to other parts of his body, and it's causing him pain even as he continues to speak out on public issues. Now, in an interview with the BBC, the younger Biden, he said Joe Biden's condition is very sad to watch. The 83-year-old former president, whose age was a concern for much of his time in office, was the oldest man to lead the country. Well, ICE tells the Associated Press it expects every officer and agent in the field to be equipped with a body camera by the end of this month. But whether the public will get to see the footage will be up to the agency. Acting ICE Director David Ventrella, he defended its body camera policy after serious injuries or deaths in custody. Sydney Airport authorities, they're investigating a near collision between two planes on the tarmac at Australia's busiest airport. A Jetstar Airways plane was taxiing out from its bay at Sydney Kingsford Smith Airport when sources say a Qatar Airways plane approached. No passengers were injured, but the incident did cause a number of flight delays. In sports, Michael Brennan and Beau Hossler, they share the Wyndham Championship lead at the PGA Tour at 16 under par. They're closely followed by Tom Kim at 15 under and Alex Noren at 14 under. And soccer star Lionel Messi, he's mourning the loss of his father, Jorge Messi. He died at the hospital in the central Argentina city of Rosario. Messi was a chemical technician, also a steel worker. He also enjoyed playing soccer. He later served as his son's agent and business manager. Jorge Messi, he was 68 years old. Goes to maybe explain why he was so emotional during the World Cup, too, because there were these talks about his father was going through health issues. So
very sorry to hear that.
He's a fairly young guy, 68.
68, yeah.
Go back to what you mentioned just a moment ago as we were talking to the representative. They're just about these power issues.
Yes.
And I'm curious how you've seen that play out over these last many years.
It's last many years, but it seems like I remember as a child, like going to Puerto Rico and having to deal with that. So just how it continues now, and then after Hurricane Maria, how it just became worse. I mean, you see it as a part of cultural history too. I mean, you see it in songs. You see it like Bad Bunny has a song about it.
And in the Super Bowl,
in the Super Bowl, you saw it, and people were like, "What does that mean?" And I was trying to explain it. It means a song is about how people are climbing up because there's always power out. It's a way of life.
Trying to rig it,
and it shouldn't be.
Yep.
Is there a frustration? I know we're short on time, but is there a frustration between, like, I think of Puerto Rico, these really fancy resorts and these tourists coming in and spending all that money, and how it doesn't seem to get to the places it needs to go?
No, it doesn't. And it's just, it's frustrating as someone who sees family members going through this. It's frustrating as someone, like, I feel like I can't do anything at this point. So it's tough.
All right. Well, thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. All right, coming up here in our 9 o'clock hour, Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens is going to join us to share her thoughts on the Michigan Senate race and on Democrats' chances in the fall more broadly.
And up next, a sight that captivated North America 2 years ago. That's right, a total solar eclipse. Now it's Europe's turn. We'll check in from Spain.
Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm David Gura with Christina Ruffini, and this week parts of Europe will be treated to a rare celestial event that has not happened in nearly 3 decades.
Should I sing it?
Total eclipse of the heart?
I'm not going to do it. I value our audience more than that.
Well,
all right, a total
we don't have the
solar...
rights. That's the main issue.
So totally
Sorry.
fair. I'm not sure I'd be on pitch enough for it to matter, but a total solar eclipse will darken the afternoon sky across Spain, Iceland, and Greenland, with many other cities witnessing the event. Joining us now, Imo Bell. She's an astronomer with the Royal Observatory of Greenwich right now on the Spanish island of Mallorca, which should be right in the path of this eclipse. Are you as excited as our producer, Patrick Becker, who was so excited about this? We're doing a whole segment on it, but we're very happy to talk to you. Why do people get excited about this?
Well, I don't know how excited Patrick is, but I would probably argue I'm more excited if it's a competition.
Oh, I just heard "take that" in my ear from the control room. So what are you expecting to see? How big is this going to be? I mean, when we had one of these over the U.S. a couple years ago, people kind of lost their minds. Are you expecting, are Europeans more chill about this, or are you expecting a similar reaction?
I don't know if Europeans are more chill. I feel like the reaction in the US was huge because that was a really important event. So many people, I think 44 million people saw the total solar eclipse of the 8th of April, what was it, 2024, 2 years ago. And because that was such an event, it built up so much excitement that spread across the whole entire world that definitely over here in Europe, we caught it. And now 2 years on, it's our turn. And you've sort of sowed the seeds for all the excitement as well. And so we're even more excited, I think, especially because us in Europe, we've not seen a total solar eclipse since 1999.
Wow.
This is a huge event. We are so excited. And we are not going to see a total solar eclipse again in the UK for sure until 2090. So this is a massive deal. Where I am in Palma, all the shops are selling solar eclipse glasses. There's information about it everywhere. Yeah, so we are very, very excited.
Talk to us a bit about totality and what's that's like. I mean, talking to friends and family who experienced it the last time around here in the States, it sounded like a pretty magical couple of minutes.
Yeah. No, for sure. It's totally magical. Over a couple of hours, it depends on each eclipse, the moon moves across the disk of the sun in the sky until, if you're lucky, if you're in the path of totality, it will completely cover the sun, which is such a special moment because, as well, on the planet Earth, we are unique in it being able to experience these total solar eclipses. For example, Mars has got 2 moons, Phobos and Deimos, and if they go in front of the sun, they don't completely cover the surface of the sun. They do these little transits of the sun. We are just so lucky that our moon and our sun appear to be the same size in the sky because the moon is 400 times smaller and also 400 times closer. They almost perfectly match up. So it's extremely special, and some people describe it as quite eerie. The animals can react because the sky will get darker even though it's the daytime. It's not the right time, and so it can sort of confuse the animals a little bit as well. And I mean, it is just so exciting because we go about our day-to-day lives forgetting, because it's so easy to forget. We're also busy, we're also stressed, forgetting that we are just on a ball of rock in space, nearly 13,000 kilometers wide, going around a star that's 150 million kilometers away. And when, you know, the moon, the earth and the sun all line up like this, and you see it during totality, it can remind us what we are a part of.
I feel like it's been kind of a good year for the cosmos. It's been a good year for space. We've had some pop culture moments. We've had some new technology here in the U.S. We've had this, private sector space race, getting excitement. You've studied this for a while. I'm sure it's ebbed and flowed. Do you feel like these kind of events kind of renew interest in this field of study and make people excited to look outside our atmosphere?
Absolutely. No, I absolutely agree. I mean, solar eclipses are a opportunity for everyone to appreciate the scale of the universe, the scale of space, to make us, stop and have a little look. And that's what makes it so exciting. Everyone can appreciate the eclipse. You don't need that many tools to see it. I mean, you can use it. You can view an eclipse using a colander, using a pinhole projector to see the eclipse. So it means everyone can see it, which is why it's just so exciting. But as well, in terms of science, eclipses offer a extremely unique opportunity to study the sun that you wouldn't usually get. And a lot of our understanding of science comes off the back of solar eclipses. For example, one of the first sort of bits of evidence we had to back up part of Einstein's theory of general relativity was during a total solar eclipse in 1919, where we were able to see that actually the light from the stars that were grazing the disk of the sun were in fact bent around the mass of the sun. And we wouldn't be able to see that during the day until in 1919, when the total solar eclipse blocked out the massive light of the sun, and they allowed astronomers to see these points of light, these stars, and see how they had slightly been moved because of the mass of the sun. A total solar eclipse allowed us to discover the element helium, which gets its name from the sun, from the ancient Greek god Helios. And next week, Wednesday, 12th of August, a NASA mission will be, they're flying a jet to chase the moon's shadow across the Earth so that they can study totality for longer.
Very cool.
And they will be studying the corona of the sun, because the outer atmosphere of the sun, which is a very mysterious part of the sun because it's superheated to over 1 million degrees, which is what we're not entirely sure how that happens when the surface of the sun is just
very cool.
5,500 degrees.
Mabel, thank you very much for joining us. Good luck. Enjoy totality. Appreciate your time on this Sunday. We are coming up on 8 o'clock here in New York City.
The next hour of Bloomberg This Weekend starts right now.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend, live from New York with David Gura, Christina Ruffini, and Lisa Mateo. The latest headlines, key analysis, big interviews, and the stories that hit home on your days off.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend. It is 8 o'clock in New York City from Bloomberg's World Headquarters. I'm David Gura.
I'm Christina Ruffini with Lisa Mateo, bringing you the latest breaking news, reports, analysis, and everything else live this morning and every weekend from 7 to 10 a.m. We're going to get started right away this morning. Lisa Mateo with the headlines.
You got it. And let's get right into it. Iran's foreign minister says direct talks with the U.S. are currently impossible. Now, it comes after Iran said it's very close to a deal with Oman and a new shipping route through the Strait of Hormuz. The foreign minister warned that any agreement is subject to other conditions, and that includes compensation for the U.S.'s violations to the Memorandum of Understanding. Iran also wants the U.S. to lift the naval blockade, withdraw military forces from around Iran, and remove U.S. sanctions and release frozen assets. Well, yesterday, Vice President J.D. Vance, he told Fox News some progress has been made in the recent talks.
They're hurting in a big way. They want this thing to be over. The question is whether they're able, their system is able to give the things that are necessary for us to be happy, for us to feel like we've gotten what we need out of this particular engagement.
Now, Vance also added that the U.S. expects the same amount of oil and gas coming out of the Gulf as before the conflict, and that, quote, that is what the Iranians have told us they are going to do. The Pentagon's number 2 official has asked major U.S. defense companies to fast-track efforts to produce and deliver key weapon systems. It comes at a time of concern over shortages due to the war in Iran. Steve Feinberg, he's the Deputy Secretary of Defense. He said it includes wide-area surveillance, air defense sensors and interceptors, and missile tracking systems. The request was made in a letter seen by Bloomberg to major defense companies, including Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and RTX Corp. Ukrainian drone strikes in Russia have killed 5 people and injured 24 others. The regional administration says the strikes damaged 29 apartment blocks and 5 private houses, as well as administrative and commercial facilities. Typhoon Dolphin has made landfall in China's Zhejiang province. It comes after the country issued its highest storm alert. More than 1,000 flights were canceled and some rail services were suspended. The China Meteorological Administration, they have forecast heavy torrential rains from Sunday to Wednesday. British Columbia under a state of emergency. Fast-moving wildfires forced more than 20,000 people from communities in Western Canada. It's one of the country's top wine-producing regions. More than 100 wildfires have burned across the province due to hot, windy weather and prolonged drought. And a large wildfire burning near Albania's capital. It continues to spread, forcing authorities to evacuate residents from several villages. A man suspected of accidentally sparking the blaze has been arrested. David and Christina, a lot more reports of these
pictures
wildfires.
There for those listening on radio. I mean, they're just dramatic scenes of those fires in both places.
All right, thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're going to start today with some new reporting from Bloomberg from last night. The Deputy Secretary of Defense is asking major U.S. defense companies to boost productions of key systems, asking them to submit their plans by late August for, quote, more aggressive delivery schedules and or increased production capacity.
This new reporting comes just days after President Trump posted to social media saying the U.S. has, quote, massive amounts of munitions. Joining us now is Bloomberg Economics defense lead Becca Wasser and retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt. He served as Assistant Secretary of State for Political-Military Affairs and as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Middle East Policy. Becca, let me start with you. The verb is ask. Christina used just a moment ago. How difficult is it going to be to accelerate this process? I mean, the rap that the defense industry has in Washington is that things take way, way, way longer than one might hope or want, and that's been the case for a very long time. Steve Feinberg making this ask, what difference is it likely to make?
I think in some ways it is a signal to defense industry that any efforts they take to ramp up production, whether that is trying to improve facilities, procure long lead items where there's oftentimes, some of these, kinks in the supply chain bottlenecks, all of this are going to be signals for them to take steps that production is needed and that, the demand is there. But I think it's really interesting that Deputy Secretary Feinberg focused not necessarily on some of the equipment that is most needed today, Obviously, there's been so much focus on munitions consumed in the Iran war, but he really focused on some of those next generation weapons, trying to speed production so that it becomes ingrained within those production cycles for those to be delivered faster. The problem is he's looking at some of the most complex weapons, including things that are needed for air defense systems that could be part of Trump's Golden Dome project, which is intended to protect all of America from all-out aerial attack, which is a pretty big ask. So all of that to say is these are good efforts. These are steps in the right direction. Are any of these weapons going to materialize tomorrow? Absolutely not. But all of this is needed if there is going to be a sea change in how the U.S. defense industry operates.
It seems a lot of those components, too, especially for the more complex weapons, are coming from single suppliers. General Kimmitt, I keep asking this question, but I'm not sure I've gotten an answer yet. So we're going to play you some sound from the Army Secretary Driscoll with our colleague Tyler Kendall on this, and then I have a question for you when we get back.
When we slow things down in the innovation loop by 12 or 18 months at a time, that is just bad for soldiers, it's bad for taxpayers, and it's bad for companies. And so what we're announcing today is basically a new front door to access all of the U.S. Army's, or many of the U.S. Army's ranges. We're layering in international partners. We're going to give concierge access, and we are going to aspire to get these companies onto our range within 30 days every single time.
So, I mean, fixing this system is good, and these sound like steps, but if you're a commander being asked to carry out the policy of the president in a theater like Iran or maybe even Cuba or the Indo-Pacific, what do you do in the meantime? Because even if they cut that gap from 5 years to 2 years to a year, that's still a lot of months you don't have the correct supplies for the mission you're being asked to carry out. Are there other ways they can accomplish this? What do you do?
Yeah, you know, I think the president made a good comment. He said, we've got lots of other weapons that are available. And what was he referring to there? So instead of using precision ATACMS missiles against targets, because we're running low on ATACMS, he's going to use JDAMs, which are those big, fat 2,000-pound bombs with very cheap guidance system on it. So as a commander on the ground, what do you do if you don't have the perfect ammo? You use the less than perfect ammo. We've got plenty of it in inventory. As an artilleryman, I always worried about artillery rounds. We may not have had the most precise artillery rounds where you could fire one and knock out the target. You fire 5 of the old ones to knock out the target. You know, you improvise on the battlefield.
I'm going to put up a chart here. This is a chart kind of illustrating the stockpiles that are left after what we've seen, the adventurism in Iran thus far. And Becca, let me turn to you. I mean, this has been a week when we've seen a lot of reporting on the state of that stockpile, the quantity of munitions that we have. We've seen the blowback from the president as well. And big piece of the New York Times this weekend kind of looking again at sort of what weapons are there, what have been used. I was struck by this line in particular. It could take more than 2 years for the U.S. to replenish the more than 1,500 Patriot air defense interceptor missiles that have been used in the Iran war. Curious if your sense of that is similar to what the Times is reporting this morning, and what that means for Ukraine, where we've seen really stark relief here, that deficit playing out on the battlefield over the course of the last few days.
Bloomberg Economics, we've got a big piece of research that's coming out where we are also looking at available stockpiles and estimates of how much of that have been consumed. And our best estimate is that at least half of the U.S. Patriot stockpile has been used in the Iran war thus far. And that's a pretty scary place to be, because it's not just the stockpile of what's earmarked for operations in the Middle East. Instead, that is what is available all around the globe. And air defense is always so high in demand. There are never enough air defenses to go around. So here is where it forces really hard problems for U.S. forces, as you know, the general had mentioned. And it also forces really hard choices when it comes down to how the U.S. protects allies and partners. So already there are going to be choices about who gets a Patriot in terms of foreign military sales next, with the Gulf states most likely being at the top of that list. But Ukraine is desperate right now for Patriot interceptors, but the U.S. just doesn't have a lot of slack to give. And so that's going to create some really interesting problems for the foreseeable future when we are looking at the future of defense. But it also might spur some interesting innovation when it comes down to looking at what are the next generation air defense interceptors for ballistic missile attacks that could be created, and can they actually be produced on a faster timeline than Patriot, than THAAD, than some of the traditional air defenses that we think about?
In general, it's not just how many weapons you have. Readiness has a lot of components to it, including the morale of your fighting forces and how they're doing. And I've heard this secondhand from a couple places, but MS Now has some reporting this morning talking about the conditions on some of these battleships, especially the USS Abraham, saying families are complaining to military leadership back in San Diego about the sailors' mental health, safety on deck, lack of supplies, food shortages, water contamination, disruptions in the mail system. We heard from the Chief of Naval Operations. He is concerned about these long deployments. How much longer can these same vessels and these same sailors and soldiers be put on these deployments before you need fresh people in there and before you need to start rotating and looking holistically about deployments and how long they're lasting?
Yeah, there is a natural rotation cycle that's 3 to 1. You have one out on the water, you have one in dry dock, and you have one training to go out. So these extended deployments are much like what happened in Iraq 20 years ago. We had to keep the soldiers on the ground for much longer than we had anticipated. But the military is a self-correcting organization, and the real barometer of whether it's working or not with morale and other such issues is enlistment and re-enlistment rates. That's where you're going to find out if there's a problem, if there's a systemic problem or an episodic problem. When you get to the point where people are unwilling to join the military, you got a problem. But if you have these episodic times of, as you say, extended deployments, the military has a good way of correcting that. But if we start losing re-enlistment numbers as we have under the last 2 administrations, I think we might have a problem.
General, we've seen reporting about General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, going to the president and his team before the start of this war to raise concern about how long it could last, given how big these stockpiles are, how much they've been under stress here. We've seen pushback from the White House since then, and certainly in light of this reporting saying there really isn't any sort of crunch or difficulty here. That's not influencing the way that the White House is planning for perhaps more military action in Iran. I'm curious your read on that, your sense of the degree to which this is kind of weighing on or shaping the White House's strategic direction right now, the state of these stockpiles.
Yeah, and I think Becca referred to it a bit. The one issue about reducing stockpiles is, of course, what we can support to our allies. But even more important is what we can't be doing or what we need to be worrying about in Pacific Command, in European Command, in Africa Command. All of those commanders that are not in a current fight have contingency plans that are dependent on large stockpiles of weapons. And I'm certain that the Pacific commander is chewing on Dan Kane's ear every day saying, look, if I don't have air defense, I can't defend Taiwan. And so that's we've had this problem in the last couple of wars where you have different commanders competing for the same bucket of ammunition or ISR with the predators. So I think we need to take a hard look. And candidly, my uninformed view is this is the reason that China continues to support Iran with this type of equipment, because they are having a field day watching the United States bleed these capabilities. And every Patriot that's shot in the Middle East is one that can't be shot at an incoming Chinese missile.
And the president and the administration looking at possibly opening some other fronts, including Cuba. Becca, we want to get to that in a second. But first, you and your very smarty pants colleagues have done an analysis looking at the different factors that could potentially shift the president's Iran war calculus. One of the biggest ones, frankly, is just the president's approval rating, but there are some others in there too. What do you think has a high chance of shifting the calculation with that policy, and what is likely to be less impactful?
Listen, I think it comes down to really being about the economy. That is the thing that the president seems to care the most about. We see that even in the way that the Iran war has been prosecuted in sort of this post-Operation Epic Fury time period during these ceasefires, where when there's action, it's oftentimes on the weekend when markets are closed. So really, it's about the economics of it, because that goes back to approval ratings. To a lesser extent, it is some of these military factors, these ideas of stockpiles. I think at the end of the day, military material is not going to be the thing that's going to change the president's mind, but it does constrain his choices. And I think we've already seen that with the president being counseled against escalating in the Iran war and going for a big all-out attack because of some of the lack of air defense interceptors and the U.S. concerns about whether it could sufficiently protect U.S. forces who are giving their all right now in the Middle East.
I'm going to pull up a chart here. What it shows is going to be immediately evident to those watching on television or streaming the show for radio. Charts on the radio are hard. So the x-axis here is temporal, it's time. And on the y-axis, it's kind of level of intensity or escalation. And here I'm talking about what we've seen in terms of U.S. policy toward Cuba. So, Becca, you and your team have prepared this chart. And I do think it's fascinating in light of what we've been talking about here for the last few minutes, just about the way that the U.S.'s attention is being sort of wholly shifted toward the Middle East right now, that this is happening. But get us up to speed here on the tack that the U.S. is taking toward Cuba right now and what these escalatory measures are telling you about what the U.S. might do next, potentially.
It's telling me that there is a pressure campaign on Cuba, and that is going to continue. The president might be more focused on the Middle East, but there are certainly members of his cabinet who might still be very focused on Cuba, largely looking at Secretary of State Rubio there. But, we do see this being multi-pronged. We're seeing a bunch of things in the security space. We're seeing potential reporting about increased intelligence assets in Cuba, but we also see this continued economic squeeze on Cuba, trying to see if that in itself will lead to some form of regime change. But I think ultimately, at the end of the day, what we need to be concerned about is not that the U.S. is going to launch a war on Cuba. I think, if anything, this administration would be looking at Cuba with Caracas-colored glasses, where really it would be some type of more covert operation if the U.S. were to do anything. But even then, I'm not sure that's necessarily in the offing. But it does seem as though pressure is continuing, as well as starting to put the drumbeat towards the ways in which Cuba could be seen as a malign actor to the United States.
General, I apologize. We're almost out of time. We've only got about 30 seconds. But I did want to ask you if you think tactically, with everything we've talked about, the U.S. can open another front and go after Cuba.
Well, if that's a question for me, look, I think the administration, all administrations are not just single focus administrations. They can juggle the balls. We used to have to be prepared for a two-front war, one with Korea, one in Western Europe. So there's nothing that I see right now going on in Cuba that would tell me that anything is being drawn away from the Iran effort to focus on the Cuba effort. I think they could do both at the same time.
General Kimmitt, thank you very much. Thanks to Becca Wasser as well for joining us here on this Sunday. Appreciate it.
Thank you both. Up next, we're going to talk about the war in Ukraine. Reports that Vladimir Putin might be planning a significant test of NATO's power. That's up next on Bloomberg This Weekend. Straight ahead.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Week, and I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's update you on today's top stories. Saudi Arabia's energy ministry says the fire that broke out at Saudi Aramco's oil refinery early on Sunday has been extinguished. Now, in a post on X, it said no injuries were reported, but did not provide any details on the cause of the fire. Yemen's Houthis have claimed that attack. The Trump administration putting the pressure on Florida oil magnate and Republican Party donor Harry Sargent III to divest from Venezuela. Sources tell Bloomberg the Treasury Department froze the assets of Sargent's offshore company that's involved with Venezuelan oil-producing ventures. They pointed to violations of a 2018 executive order. In company news, Paramount Skydance says it will release 30 movies a year in theaters if it acquires Warner Brothers Discovery. Bloomberg is reporting the company has offered 3-year agreements rights to AMC Entertainment and Cineworld Group's Regal Cinemas, requiring to release the films exclusively in theaters for at least 45 days. The films would also not be available to stream online for at least 90 days. And Apple has reportedly been testing memory chips from China's CXMT across product lines, including iPhones and MacBooks. The Wall Street Journal reporting Apple has held early talks with the company with the goal of using the components in some devices sold in China. It comes as Apple's been addressing a memory crunch due to the AI boom. Federal rules, though, they prevent U.S. companies from transferring technology to CXMT. David and Christina.
Apple really wants those, and fascinating to see how Apple has kind of pivoted in the wake of this trade war to India, other countries throughout the region. So this is part of that as well.
I also might be single-handedly not helping with that memory crunch due to the number of photos I have in my iCloud. I should probably cull some of those.
We'll hold you responsible. Lisa, thank you very much. Well, key members of President Trump's foreign policy team may be heading to Kyiv and Moscow in the next week or so. That's according to Russia's state-run TASS news agency.
That's right. The pair has been to Moscow several times for meetings with President Putin and other top officials, but this would mark the first visit to Kyiv. But after a lot of momentum on Ukraine's side earlier this summer, where do things stand now? We're going to bring in Missy Ryan. She's a staff writer at The Atlantic who covers defense and the State Department, and she writes about it in her new piece, Ukraine's Short-Lived Comeback. All right, Missy, it's nice to see you. That's not the most positive sounding title. It did seem like there was this big sea change. We had this nice meeting at this summit in Turkey. The vibes were good. We had all these formerly anti-Ukraine right-wing kind of bloggers, including Lara Loomer, change their minds. Some visited Ukraine. We're all saying, you know, the president needs to get on board. We had this promise of patriots, and then it all just kind of went away. Do we know what happened?
Yeah, so it really is a remarkable comeback story that Ukraine has. Everybody remembers that train wreck of a meeting that President Zelensky had with Donald Trump in the Oval Office in February 2025, where the Ukrainians were asked to leave. You know, they insulted each other. It was very ugly. That represented a real low point early in the Trump administration, and this kind of stunning reality check for the Ukrainians who had had so much American support behind them since the beginning of the war. But they really did manage to claw their way back and make a successful argument to the Trump administration that they could deliver things in U.S. interests, like, for example, providing drone technology that the United States didn't have, valuable expertise that they had gained on the battlefield. And most of all, they actually could sell themselves as winners, you know, basically being able to block the Russian advance on the front, you know, kind of change the battlefield equation in their favor. And everybody knows that Donald Trump loves a winner. So by the time the pair met in Ankara for the NATO summit this summer, Trump really seemed much more pro-Ukraine than he ever had. And he made this very important promise to allow Ukraine to acquire a license to manufacture Patriot missiles, which were these air defense missiles that Ukraine desperately needs. And so we kind of tell the story of that and how that was really this ephemeral, fleeting high point that Ukraine had. It didn't last for very long. It turns out that Trump doesn't seem like he's going to fulfill that promise that he made. Zelensky is now facing more political problems at home. The ambassador here in Washington left because she was facing corruption problems. He had to dismiss several ministers. People were upset about that. And then, maybe most importantly, the reality of the battlefield is very difficult. There was a big airstrike last week where Ukraine was not able to shoot down any of the ballistic missiles that Russia fired at Kyiv and surrounding areas, and 17 people died. And so that's a real scary harbinger of a dire future for Ukraine if they can't get these air defense supplies that they need.
28 missiles in total. Missy, a theme of the piece, I think, is that personnel is policy here. And we've seen President Zelensky kind of go through this reinvention vis-a-vis his relationship with President Trump. But I want to go back to someone you mentioned, that is the now former ambassador of Ukraine to the U.S. And she, in your piece, talks about the moment of recognition she had at that first disastrous Oval Office meeting when she recognized that Ukraine's overtures weren't calibrated correctly to this administration. And you mentioned the kind of personnel changeover that we've seen in Kyiv in recent weeks. What should we make of that? I think that there was a school of thought among some experts that we've seen this over the course of the war, that President Zelensky has kind of cleaned house or made adjustments to the cabinet. But it does seem, in terms of the response to it, the popular protest that rose as a result of that there's something different this time around. So yes, there's the dynamic between Zelensky and Trump, but there's something broader at play here about his kind of hold-on strategy when it comes to this war at this particular moment.
Yeah, I mean, as everyone, the viewers will know, Zelensky has had a remarkable run. He has the kind of support that Donald Trump would really dream of, given that he's overdue for elections. But Ukrainians have shown themselves very willing to make their feelings known, to go out in the streets and protest. And that's what happened when Zelensky dismissed this very popular defense minister, Fedorov. And so it's a balancing act. He's trying to calibrate for the battlefield requirements. He's trying to make sure that corruption, which Ukraine has a long history with, is managed. And so he's got a very difficult task, keeping the United States and the Europeans on board. But as the war goes on and Ukrainians grow more and more fatigued, and most importantly, as he maybe proves unable to keep them safe in their homes over the coming winter, with the air defense shortage, and then we're going to see what happens with attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure over the winter. That makes the stakes that much higher for Zelensky.
When it comes to that air defense issue, it seems to me the defense minister seems to have played a crucial role there, because you talk about in your piece how Fedorov was the one who kind of established the relationship with Elon Musk and had to step out of his children's birthday party because Musk finally called him back to get him on the phone to get permission for them to use Starlink over Ukraine. And that's one of the ways, in lieu of these Patriots, that they've been able to have some air defenses. Ukraine is now asking Musk to let them use Starlink over Russia to help that targeting. It doesn't seem like that relationship is there, and possibly the dismissal of this defense minister has made that even less likely.
Yeah, that's true. And the request for the guidance systems to be used over Russia was news that we broke last week. It's interesting. It does show, as you said earlier, that personnel is policy. It also, I think, is an interesting illustration of the informal, unorthodox way that business is done these days in the United States and in Ukraine, with billionaires from the outside, really making these consequential decisions for public life, for government, and all of that. So, Fedorov did have this relationship. It's unclear whether Musk was ever going to grant this. And, I guess there's some possibility that he still could. But, the Starlink technology is crucial for Ukraine. And it just shows that the stakes for the decisions from these outside actors really can't be overstated. There is some possibility that kind of plan B things that that Ukraine could do. The Pentagon has its own version of Starlink that's licensed to it. It's not clear whether they would ever themselves be willing to take that decision. Right. There are some proposals from outside people about other military means that they could use to staunch the air defense problem, essentially.
Hearing you say this, I'm reminded of what we talked about with Evan Osnos yesterday of the New Yorker, about the kind of dynamic between the U.S. and China, that it's not kind of a great power struggle so much as it's a struggle between oligarchic men, small groups of oligarchic men who are figuring all of this out in real time. Missy, Ryan, Christina mentioned at the top here this task reporting that maybe Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff could be headed to Kyiv. I mean, I was astonished reading that report that they hadn't been there before. I think a lot of people will be surprised by that as well. It makes me wonder just about the faith that President Zelensky and his team have in there being a kind of constructive conversation about a path forward here when it comes to diplomacy. Yes, these two men, son-in-law and friend of the president, are incredibly busy and in a variety of geographies, seemingly all at once here. But does President Zelensky feel like he has a line of communication or the commitment from this administration to kind of see through a diplomatic solution?
They do in some ways, but it has been a one-sided situation from the beginning vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine. You had Witkoff's made 8 visits to Moscow since becoming special envoy. He's made 0 to Kyiv. And you had this other envoy, Keith Kellogg, at the beginning of the administration, who was supposed to sort of do the Ukrainian side of the account, but he was really sidelined. And that really was an indication of Trump's feelings and his instincts going into this war, his kind of hard to explain trust of Putin and all of that. But I think, over time, Trump has grown more frustrated with Putin, and he really is now seen as the chief impediment to at least serious conversations. But that feeling may exist, but the kind of structural diplomacy hasn't caught up with that, in the sense that Witkoff and Kushner have not gone to Ukraine. It is a more difficult journey. Rather than flying in on your private jet, you have to take the overnight train from Poland. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that would play any role, but it does seem like if the administration is serious at some point, they need to either go themselves or use American leverage to force Russia to sit down with Ukrainian leadership, which is something that they have been unwilling to do thus far.
All right, Missy Ryan, staff writer at The Atlantic, thank you so much for digging into that piece. I recommend reading the whole thing.
Yes, commended very much.
Thanks for taking the time.
Just want to draw a fine point on that. I mean, it is kind of astonishing that you have 8 trips to Moscow by the lead on kind of resolving this war and none to Kyiv. And I'm surprised that hasn't kind of surfaced more, been something that's really gotten to the craw of President Zelensky and others publicly.
But I also think Missy makes a very good, very basic point that it's a really uncomfortable trip and it's long and you have to commit to it because you have to take this very loud. I have not done it. I didn't get on the rotation for that trip, but I have a lot of colleagues who've been on it, and it's loud and it's long and there's just really no other way to do it.
Perilous as well. I mean,
and it's still dangerous. You got to go through Poland, and it may just be, it's just not easy to do. Right. So you have to really want to go there. But we'll see how this all works out, and we'll see if these individuals indeed do make it there for their first visit.
All right, great piece by Missy Ryan. Thanks again to her for joining us. And coming up here, 3 Federal Reserve presidents of Federal Reserve banks calling for higher interest rates at last month's meeting. Will that change after this week's key inflation reports? Get CPI coming up this week. Some analysis from Neil Dutta. It's coming up here on Bloomberg this weekend. You can watch the show on Bloomberg Television at Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg Business app. Of course, you can listen to the show on Bloomberg Radio as well. Much more to come. Stay with us.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Week, and I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's update you on today's top stories. Hunter Biden says his father's prostate cancer has spread to other parts of his body and is causing him pain, even as he continues to speak out on public issues. In an interview with the BBC, the younger Biden said Joe Biden's condition is very sad to watch. The 83-year-old former president, whose age was a concern for much of his office, was the oldest man to leave the country. Well, ICE tells the Associated Press it expects every officer and the agent in the field to be equipped with a body camera by the end of this month. But whether the public will get to see the footage will be up to the agency. Acting ICE Director David Ventrella, he defended its body-worn camera policy after serious injuries or deaths in custody. Soccer star Lionel Messi is mourning the loss of his father. Jorge Messi, he died at a hospital in the central Argentina city of Rosario. Messi was a chemical technician and steel worker. He also enjoyed playing soccer. He later served as his son's agent and business manager. Jorge Messi was 68. To the PGA Tour, will Michael Brennan and Beau Hossler, they share the Wyndham Championship lead at the PGA Tour at 16 under par. They're closely followed by Tom Kim at 15 under and Alex Noren at 14 under. David and Christina, your golf update. There you go.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Lisa.
Excellent work, as always, Lisa.
Yes.
All right, this week, attention shifts to the July inflation report. CPI coming in on Wednesday, and the PPI, get ready for all your acronyms, that's coming in on Thursday. Well, they are expected to show inflation still above that Fed target of 2%. The exact number could further calm calls for an interest rate hike.
With us now is Neil Dutta. He's the head of economic research at Renaissance Macro. Neil, great to see you. I've got my latest copy of Dutta's Economic Daily here, and I want to start, if we could, by looking backward before we look forward. So let's start with the jobs report that we got last week. 23,000 jobs lost. Saw the unemployment rate tick down. Brings up this question about the break-even level. Want to get your thoughts on that. Before we get there, let's play a bit of sound here of Kevin Hassett, the president's economic advisor, talking about the break-even. Here's what he had to say.
Labor force participation is kind of on a downward trajectory, which means that the break-even jobs number, that is the jobs number you need so that unemployment rate doesn't go up, has gone from maybe 120, 130,000 a few years ago to maybe about 40,000 now. And so what it means is that what the market is used to looking at, it's like a normal tread the water kind of jobs number if it's around 100, is no longer true.
No longer true. The smiling countenance of Kevin Hassler talking about this. Neil, what's your reaction to that? How have you seen this evolution, and sort of what worries, if any, were sparked for you from the jobs report that we got on Friday?
Well, I mean, I think for me as a Fed watcher, all it really does is reinforce the notion that they had to begin the year, which is that the break-even level, the number of jobs you need every month to hold the unemployment rate flat, that number is going down. Right. So if you look at, just so far this year, we've been averaging about 50 to 60,000 jobs a month. And during that time, on average per month, the unemployment rate has been going down, just 0.04%. So percentage points per month on average. So, it kind of speaks to this idea that the break-even level is lower. And that just means you're going to get negative jobs numbers more often, right? Just, it's like sort of a statistical artifact of that, right? I mean, if the break-even level is lower, you're going to be bobbing around the zero line more often.
So we are expecting CPI and PPI out next week. Our chief economist for the U.S., Anna Wong, says she's expecting those to be pretty soft, not really impact, and she expects the Fed to hold rates in September. Last month, before the Fed decision, you were predicting a rate hike, and now you've said, if you're going to end up hiking rates by September, might as well do it now. Given these new numbers, is that still your prediction, or do you think they're going to hold again?
Well, I think it's important to note that just on the face of it, the last employment report actually pushes the Fed further in the direction of hiking, not away from it. So I think that that's a bit of a misconception in the marketplace, given the bond market reaction. To borrow from Janet Yellen, the unemployment rate is the single best indicator of labor market health. And what happened with the unemployment rate? It fell. It fell. So if when you look at, every few months, the Fed releases their summary of economic projections, their dots plot. Go in and look at what they don't forecast the rate of growth in non-farm payrolls. They look at the unemployment rate. That's the slack measure that they focus on primarily. And to the extent that it's going down, it's going to push the hawks, to be even more aggressive in pushing for hikes going forward. So I don't really buy the idea that the jobs number pushes them away from anything. If anything, it pushes them towards it. Now, with respect to inflation, if you think about it, if Anna's right and you get sort of 0.2 on inflation month in and month out between now and the end of the year, she's probably right. The Fed's not going to hike. I would accept that. But in order for that to happen, you're basically talking about a scenario that's had less than a 10% chance over the last 3 years. I mean, getting 0.2s, that's happened maybe less than 40% of the time over the last 3 years. And then expecting it to string along for several months in a row, the probability of that's even lower. So to me, the distribution of these inflation reports has generally skewed higher in recent years. And when you look at the last number, there were big declines in lodging away from home, communication services, motor vehicle insurance. In other words, I think the distribution was somewhat narrower in scope. That's why median inflation was somewhat higher than traditional core inflation in June. So if that unwinds, it's very easy to see, maybe a 0.3. And, then at that point, all bets are off. So I just think the odds still favor a hike. It's almost like if it's really, really cloudy outside, you should assume that lightning will probably strike at least once. And that's kind of how I'm looking at these meetings. I mean, you assume that every meeting between now and the end of the year is effectively a coin flip. And if you're flipping a coin that many times, it's probably going to come up hike at least once.
Neil, can we get existential here? You mentioned, long time. Get comfortable. Okay. Long-time Fed watcher, and I'm curious how you're processing the kind of new Warsh regime when it comes to communication. So you mentioned the dot plot, summary of economic projections, all these things, which I guess have perhaps dubious longevity. I mean, I don't know sort of what that's going to look like in a year's time, but look, we've heard from those dissenting votes in recent days, got their take on what's happening, heard about the incrementalism from Neil Kashkari, for instance. They, I imagine, take on more primacy. You're going to pay more attention to their comments going forward here in the absence of what we're going to hear in all likelihood from the chairman. How does your job, how does Fed watching change notionally here going forward in light of what we've seen Kevin Warsh propose?
Well, look, I mean, I think for me, it's first, you always have to let the data drive your views of what the Fed will do, because I think for most of the people on the committee, it's the data that ultimately drives them towards an action or not. I think what's notable is that it feels like the dissents or the hawkish shift is mounting, not just from regional Fed presidents, but also from within the Board of Governors. I mean, you're talking about people like Lisa Cook, potentially getting on board for a rate hike in September. So, if the governors begin to open up to the idea of hiking, it's going to be very difficult for Warsh to keep them at bay. So the reason why I sort of suggested, hey, you should just get out in front and hike in July. It's much better to do it when you have control than to kind of go into it kicking and screaming. So, people are talking about, well, maybe he'll say something interesting at Jackson Hole. At this point, he may not have a choice but to kind of shift it by Jackson Hole because everyone's already there. So does he really want to be getting out there in the September FOMC press conference explaining a decision where they all hike and he dissents? I mean, that seems to be a little bit ridiculous. So it's almost like a tail wagging the dog situation. But, just the short end of the short answer to your question is basically it's almost unilateral disarmament from the chair. So if he's doing that, then you have to kind of overweight the views of everyone else. You either think Kevin Warsh is in control of the FOMC, or you think the FOMC is in control of Kevin Warsh. And if you think the latter, that probably means that the yield curve is going to flatten as we get into the fall.
On a Sunday, Neil Dutta, Renaissance Macro. Great to speak with you. Thank you very much. Appreciate the time. Good to talk with you, as always.
Never in my life did I think I would care so much about a document.
You got to. I mean, these are the crucial documents of our time.
Honestly, the worst part is now I find it interesting.
Bloomberg.
Now I find it interesting, and it scares me a little bit. All right, coming up, it's been a tough month for some fast food chains after an outbreak of foodborne illnesses. How is this impacting their bottom line, and what do consumers need to know to stay safe?
As always, you can explore live streaming news and interviews, all our Bloomberg TV shows, documentaries, reporting, analysis, and more. You can find it in one place, Bloomberg.com/video. Stay with us. Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm David Gura with Christina Ruffini, and this week's Michigan's Health Department lifting its lettuce warning as cases of cyclosporasis. Did I say that? Cyclosporasis. This parasite have
We
fallen.
know what this is.
We all know what it is.
Everybody knows what this is.
I won't give the shorthand. Michigan has reported over 12,000 cases since June, including 279 hospitalizations and 2 deaths.
I've been saying cyclospora. I didn't know there was a longer version.
It's the cyclospora. It's the cyclosporasis.
You know who will know the answer to this?
Not
Joining
me.
us now is Bloomberg restaurant reporter Daniela Sartori. All right, how do we say the name of this?
Thank you.
Why is it everywhere? And is there anything left that I can eat? Because it seems like all of my food is coming for me.
All right, Cyclospora, the parasite, cyclosporiasis, the disease.
There we go. Okay, thank you.
Very much.
There we go, yes. And definitely, Michigan actually, as you guys were saying, told people that lettuce is fine now after warning people to stay off salad mixes because of this parasite, which has infected tons of people in the state. And the interesting part of this is that the rate of infections has been just so much higher than in prior years. I mean, it's a seasonal type of parasite. People eat more salads in the summer. It's hot out, but this year it's just been off the charts, basically.
Daniela, walk us through the way this has become kind of manifest in the bottom lines of a lot of these restaurants. You reported on Sweetgreen, the salad chain, which I should note has not been having any difficulties whatsoever with this particular parasite, but is feeling the knock-on effects of this. Talk a bit more about that, just kind of like how this parasite existing in some of our guts, but mostly in our psyches, is affecting the way that people are buying food, going to restaurants right now.
Absolutely. So, since the Cyclospora outbreak, basically Americans all over the country have been really spooked to eat anything with lettuce. The interesting part is that the outbreak, it is large, but it was only related to iceberg lettuce provided by a supplier called Taylor Farms, sold in restaurants like Taco Bell. It did go to other, retailers like Walmart. So it did have a broad reach, but it was only iceberg lettuce. Sweetgreen doesn't even sell iceberg lettuce, but it was just a chilling effect that this parasite had that basically made people pull back from anything that was basically heavy on leafy greens. And so Sweetgreen was already struggling because of its own missteps. The company has admitted that its prices were too high, that perhaps its offerings weren't really resonating with people. And so it was already on a turnaround plan. And then this parasite comes along and basically it forced the company to cut its annual outlook even more. So previously they expected that sales at their established restaurants were going to fall by about 4%, as much as 4%. Now they expect as much as 8%, simply because of the fact that people are scared of lettuce, basically. And, it's also worth it to know, it's not just that Sweetgreen's supply chain hasn't been hit by this. They don't even serve iceberg lettuce.
I should say they do not. It's arugula and other spring mixes that I get when I go to Sweetgreen.
I also did just look up if there is a DSM-specific order for fear of lettuce. There is not, although there might be after this.
Yeah.
That's good. But,
it's not just lettuce. Now we've got this potential Salmonella outbreak. It's tied. 27 illness clusters have been reported at Chipotle and Qdoba locations in 7 states. Likely somewhere in the ingredient mix of jalapenos, red onions, cilantro, avocado. Bon Appetit has an article out right now called American Food Safety is in its flop era. Is this going to put a bigger burden on the private sector to self-police if the government isn't doing it, but it is going to start impacting their bottom line?
So it's interesting to see the sequence of events here. So even for a company like Chipotle, which has pretty advanced systems that allow it to know where basically everything in its supply chain has been, right? So when the company found that the jalapenos that they use for the guacamole could be, tainted with the salmonella, they have this system where they can go in and pretty quickly pinpoint where this ingredient has been, who the supplier is, and all of that. So I would say that in that regard, a lot of companies have definitely come quite far when it comes to being able to really understand their supply chains. But, the order of events still is that a state, for example, in this case, it was Minnesota, has to tell the company that they're seeing illnesses, right? And so it does matter, when states such as Minnesota have a functioning system, like a functioning unit that tracks, foodborne illnesses there. We should say that as of now, this outbreak with Salmonella has been tied to jalapenos from a specific supplier. There have already been recalls in place. And restaurants such as Chipotle and Qdoba as well actually removed the ingredient from their restaurants before the information even became public. So actually Bloomberg News was first to report this on Monday, on August 4th, that Chipotle was linked to this outbreak. And by then, the jalapenos were already out of the restaurants. And so basically the health authorities have come out and said, look, because these restaurants were able to act pretty quickly, we don't think that there's an ongoing risk. They're not really telling people to stay away from restaurants. Unlike with the Cyclospora outbreak, in the early days with Taco Bell, some of the federal health authorities actually did come out and say, hey guys, don't eat this lettuce at Taco Bell in these particular states.
Danielle, great to speak with you. Danielle Sturtori joining us this morning. Cyclospora, say it one more time for me.
Cyclosporiasis.
There we go. I'm going to say it 5 times during this next commercial break. But Danielle, thank you very much for the
I'm going to ardently avoid reading that word if it comes up on our notes.
And I just want to say, the incubation period for some of these things, very brief. But when you look at kind of the corporate legacy of all of this stuff, incredibly long lasting. We're talking about Chipotle once again. I go back to, 2015?
100%.
They had that guacamole. Anyway, that was such a drag on the company's customer base and stock price for so long. I think that they're rightly worried about the effects of that. But you see from a lot of the companies, Sweetgreen among them, worry about just perception of this and the effect that that's likely to have on these companies.
And it's interesting she's talking about the self-policing too. I know some of the big chains, especially Costco, they do a lot of their own food inspections. Yes, because they want to make sure this doesn't happen. All right.
Okay, I'm going to work on my pronunciation here during the break. We are coming up at 9 a.m. in New York. Coming up here, we're going to speak live with Michigan Congressman Haley Stevens.
The next hour of Bloomberg This Weekend starts right now. Coming up on Bloomberg this weekend, Iran says it wants concessions from the U.S. to reopen the Strait.
We're really in the middle of the game here. This thing is not over.
Where negotiations stand, and is America part of the conversation?
And Democrats say they'll unite behind Abdul al-Sayed after he won Michigan's Democratic primary. We'll talk to the congresswoman he defeated by about 20,000 votes.
Plus, a year after Sandwichgate, why the charges against a man who threw a turkey sub at a federal officer didn't stick. Is it part of a larger pattern at the Department of Justice?
I talked to defense attorneys who said these prosecutors should not have been filing these cases in federal court.
Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend, coming to you live from our world headquarters here in New York. I'm Christina Ruffini.
And I'm David Gura, alongside Lisa Mateo. It is Sunday, August the 9th. Going to focus on politics over the course of this hour, turn our attention back to Michigan, look at the legacy of the Democratic primary that took place there, what it means for the midterms going forward, as we continue to report on what we're seeing out of the Middle East, what we're seeing in Ukraine as well. These have been animating conversations over the course of the morning. The frustration within the White House, the lack of progress on Iran in particular, palpable, I would suggest.
But as we talk about all the time, all politics are local. In our last hour, we had our team looking at an analysis of the things that were most likely to change course of the president's policy in the Middle East. And those driving factors were approval rating, gas prices, and domestic politics. So with that in mind, let's start with Lisa and the headlines.
All right, let's start here. Israel has rejected President Donald Trump's latest Gaza plan. This was at a cabinet meeting. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he vowed no military withdrawal until Hamas is, quote, genuinely disarmed. President Trump presented the plan as a, quote, major milestone to finally end in the conflict in Gaza, claiming all sides had agreed to his plan. Well, the wait for an Iranian deal with Oman on the Strait of Hormuz, it drags on. It comes as the Islamic Republic's top envoy had ruled out direct talks with the U.S. for now. Iran's foreign minister criticized what he described as U.S. violations of a short-lived interim peace agreement. Well, yesterday, Vice President J.D. Vance, he told Fox News some progress has been made in recent talks.
What we're really working through now is how you can actually set up a traffic scheme so that the ships that pass can pass through safely. That includes, of course, demining. That also includes a commitment from the Iranians that they're not going to fire at commercial vessels.
Vance added that the U.S. expects the same amount of oil and gas out of the Gulf as before the conflict, and that, quote, that is what the Iranians have told us that they are going to do. Well, the Pentagon's #2 official has asked major U.S. defense companies to fast-track efforts to produce and deliver key weapon systems. Steve Feinberg, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, said it includes wide-area surveillance, air defense sensors and interceptors, and missile tracking systems. The request was made in a letter seen by Bloomberg to major defense companies, including Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and RTX Corp. And tens of thousands of people in Puerto Rico are lining up for water delivered in tankers as new rationing program continues. The island has been under severe drought for months. San Juan and other major municipalities have implemented 48-hour water restrictions for hundreds of thousands of residents. Early this morning, Resident Commissioner of Puerto Rico, Representative Pablo José Hernández, explained the situation.
We have two droughts. We have a drought due to lack of water and rainfall, but we also have a drought of good management and competence. We've had this problem for decades. We've had the same political party in power for the last 10 years. In 10 years, you can get a lot done. You could fix a problem, or you could certainly make it a lot better. And none of that has happened.
He added that Puerto Ricans must take matters into their own hands and be better at demanding accountability from local elected officials. He said we can't blame Washington for all of our problems. David and Christina, good conversation.
It was great to have you. Yeah, thank you very much, Lisa. Appreciate it.
Thanks for your perspective on that, Lisa. All right, with just 86 days until that critical midterm that's going to decide the fate of both chambers of Congress. And right now, the latest polling shows Democrats do have an edge over Republicans, but the president says that's not his fault.
I mean, they're angry at Republicans, but they're not angry at me.
Thing. Why?
They're not angry at me, but they are angry at Republicans.
Everyone's always angry.
And there are some areas that are basically Democrat, but they're Trump, like Pennsylvania. I win Pennsylvania easily.
Back with us now is Skylar Woodhouse. She's in New Jersey, traveling with the president this weekend. Also with us in studio, Abby Livingston, Washington writer for Puck News. Skylar, let me start with you, if I could. And I'm just curious, from the president's perch there in New Jersey, how he's looking at this political terrain. I look at these latest polling numbers, and we certainly see how low his approval ratings are generally. He's looking at the approval ratings of Democrats, I imagine, and kind of plotting a path forward in light of all of that. How is he seeing domestic politics at this point in time as senators and congressmen leave Washington for their summer recesses, and he's there to kind of pick up the pieces and plot his path forward politically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, the president is facing a large amount of pressure right now as the midterms approach, as he sort of navigates his relationship with members of Congress. And this is something that he is really having to sort of figure out how he is going to proceed. What we are seeing is essentially true Trump fashion. He's doing a lot of lashing out on Democrats and saying, that he is not the problem, which is, that's how the president rolls. He's never the problem. It's everyone else. And even when last week he was in Las Vegas, supposed to be giving a speech on the economy and trying to quell concerns that voters have, but the speech ended up really turning into a rant and a rage about the Democrats. So he's really sort of having to figure out, how is he going to navigate this? And this also comes at a time where it's, raising questions on, he's sort of at this lame duck moment, and he jokes about a potential third term, but really his time is winding down, and it raises the question of, how much does the president really care as his time winds down? And, he's almost done. So it's how much effort and trying to reunite the party that does he play right now?
He also talked to Punchbowl News about how he might use his veto power if he needs to.
I have great blocking power, so they won't be able to do anything. In other words, they won't be able to
veto,
destroy
right?
it. No, I have great block. I'm a great blocker. And, they'll be putting horrible communistic type things in front of me, and I'll be just saying, no, no, no. But I'd rather be a positive force than a negative force.
I mean, if you're a Republican trying to win a contested race, that's probably not the level of support you want from the president, just saying, oh, I'll veto it anyway. But how dialed in is the president to these midterm efforts? I know we talk constantly about other things that have occupied his time, including various construction plans throughout Washington. But, are people like Susie Wiles and advisors trying to get him more focused on backing some of these Republicans in the midterms, or have they kind of given up the ghost on that?
Yeah, well, Susie Wiles, she is going through, she's navigating some health challenges right now. And really, I mean, one thing that she has sort of done is sort of let Trump be Trump, and then has really controlled the reins behind the scenes. And I think what we're seeing right now is that point as we near the midterms of how is the administration sort of working? Who is getting in Trump's face? Who is having that FaceTime? Who is easily able to have meetings with him in the Oval Office? And, we're sort of seeing a little bit of maybe that Trump won chaos coming back a little bit, and sort of, seeing some of the claws come out just a tad. But there are still a lot of, of advisors for President Trump who were really trying to get him to focus on the midterms. But at the same time, the president is really focused on a lot of, pet projects and like the reflecting pool, which, for voters is how much they care about that over the economy.
All right, Skylar Woodhouse at the White House for us. Thank you so much. We appreciate you being with us.
Abby, a quick question for you. We're going to talk to Haley Stevens here in just a moment, the congressman from Michigan. But before we get there, I just want to put up that poll that we cited at the beginning here. That's the Ipsos poll showing if midterms were today, would you vote for the Democrat or the Republican candidate? We see 36% saying Democrat there. Well, how do you read that this many months out from the midterm elections?
Well, we're getting pretty close to the starting gate of Labor Day. And so these numbers are very good for Democrats. But the problem is that amid these numbers, there are all these contentions within the party and factionalist elements, and it's most squarely in Michigan. So that's why she's a really great guest to have.
All right, let's bring her in.
Speaking of.
Yes, Congressman Haley Stevens of Michigan joins us now, fresh off that Democratic primary. She ran for Senate, of course, finished second in that primary with fewer than 20,000 votes, separating her from the winner, Abdul El-Sayed. Thank you very much for being here. Great to have you with us. And the message very much was certainly on the heels of that campaign, unity among the Democratic Party. And I wonder sort of what your life looks like in terms of politicking here in the weeks ahead. Will we see you campaigning with the Democratic nominee here in the days ahead?
Well, I can tell you I'm still in my House position, right? So I'm a Democrat who flipped a long-held Republican seat in 2018. I held the seat in 2020 with Trump on the ballot. It was a district that had voted for him, actually, back in the 16 election. And I'm really focused on the House. You know, I've talked to Democratic House leadership, Hakeem Jeffries, Pete Aguilar, and I am very eager to just flip some of these congressional seats, like Christina Hines in Michigan's 10th district, you know, Congresswoman Hillary Scholten out in Grand Rapids. You know, it's amazing that we've got her leadership out there. And we've got another seat in Michigan's 4th district, you know, Sean McCann. These are good, just middle of the road, common sense Dems. Really excited to be sleeves rolled up alongside them. And the party knows, you know, all the nominees, the whole ticket knows, you know, here in Michigan, I'm going to do whatever they want as I finish out the remainder of my congressional term. And I know that, you know, Abdul, right, we campaigned against one another for a good year and a half. So I don't, you know, maybe he's sick of hearing my voice. I don't know. I'm just kidding around. But you know,
he hasn't asked you to join him. He hasn't made that overture yet.
Look, I'm not trying to drum up drama. I don't, you know, look, we did a big unity breakfast. There was, you know, my friend Keith Williams was there. He's the chair of the Michigan Democratic Party Black Caucus. You know, I'm really proud to, you know, have had his support in my race, but we all know, you know, we're Team Dem. So, you know, they're going to be figuring it out. They've got a quick runway, and I think America, truthfully, if I can just speak candidly, I think people here in Michigan and across this country, they are just so sick of this negative, nasty, constant campaigning, butthurt if you don't win. I mean, I've had a great ride. I mean, I honestly, I was 18 years old and knocked doors for the Democratic Party. You know, I was motivated to run because I saw Trump win in 16. I was working in an R&D lab, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, there goes the scientific research budget. And so I put up my hand for a long shot run for Congress. I won. You know, I won a 6-way primary, 7,000 votes. Similar to this one. Who are those, you know, 15,000, 7,000 people in these, you know, in these primaries? I don't know if I'll ever know, but, you know, I'm proud that my name and my message was out there. I'm proud to be a Democrat. And certainly some of the differences between my former Democratic opponent and they're out there. They're on full display. Everyone knows that what was said in the primary was said. You know, I am a passionate, you know, industrial policy geek Democrat. I'm a Zionist. You know, I'm certainly going to continue to say that loudly and proudly, particularly as I'm leaving the halls of power. And I think that many fellow Zionists in both parties and maybe in that independent column, you know, they've got to know that they're protected and that their security is important as well.
But do you think that will be an issue for your former opponent, as you refer to him, in the general? I mean, this is from the New York Times. Some Democrats who supported you are clearly reluctant to rally behind al-Sayed because many Jewish Democrats in particular were dismayed about the way he criticized the Israeli government and AIPAC committees whose super PAC spent a lot of money to support you. When it comes to the general, are you confident that not just your former opponent, but several of these either self-identified democratic socialists or more left-leaning opponents can swing to the middle and get those middle-of-the-road independent voters, which are really the only votes up for grabs in so many places that are so close?
Well, I hope you don't mind. I'm drinking my cola.
No, please.
You know, it's the good stuff, right? But it's a good question. I think the nominee's going to be able to, you know, he knows what he was doing, just as I knew what I was doing. I mean, I can only speak to, you know, my campaign, right? Because I was living and breathing it. I mean, I don't want to get in it all. I'm not a big speculator of somebody else's internal thinking. I think we get into a lot of that and it gets negative. But My beliefs were fully on display. I was not hiding from them. I want a two-state solution. I want a Palestinian state. I want dignity for Lebanon and Syria. And I also, want to see a Jewish state that is deeply persecuted continue to be supported. I'm really honestly proud of my record in the Congress. On these Middle East issues, I'm co-chair of the Congressional Task Force on Hostages alongside French Hill, who's a Republican from Arkansas. We coordinated regularly with the hostages held in the families of the hostages held in the Hamas tunnels. That was a brutal situation. Look, all Americans want long-term peace. I don't think that's, hard to come by. And again, I don't know who these handful of thousands of voters are, in this primary. The way I look at the primary, I think Abdul won. He got more votes, and Democrats like Democrats, and then in terms of this general election, he's got all his, back of the office, political wizards and people who are going to give him advice, and he's going to have advice, and, Gary Peters, Alyssa Slotkin, our senator, soon to be senior senator, she's going to be campaigning alongside Abdul. She's, now going to be our senior senator, and that's just, I'm on my way out, and of the office that I love to hold, but I'm okay with that, and I'm going to help the congressional tickets and do whatever anyone else wants me to do. I'm just happy to be on the team. Honestly, I love this country. I love American democracy. I love fighting for people to make government work for them. It's unbelievable how many people need access to Social Security, disability, and Medicaid, and these programs that, everyone wants to be fair and accessible. Full funding for special education, right? Sorry to go on, but
That's okay. We're going to let our colleague Abby.
I'm going to have a swig of my beverage of choice, and then I'm going to bring in Abby here as a question. Abby Livingston has a question for you too.
We both will. All right, Abby, it's on you. So, Congresswoman, the race had barely been called, and you were out of the gate endorsing Dr. El Sayed, and you're on television having your morning Coke, making the case for him and the Democrats. But this is one of the roughest Senate primaries I've ever seen among Democrats. It was personally rough. Obviously, Israel and Gaza is a tough issue. I sometimes find supporters have a harder time coming into the fold than the actual candidate who lost. Are you confident the entire Democratic coalition can show up after such a rough primary?
I just am setting the tone for myself, okay, and the people around me. I mean, I will say that there's a lot of energy for Democrats right now. We've got Jocelyn Benson as our gubernatorial candidate, and she's doing a great job. And, folks are excited about her. I mean, there's some just, general, enthusiasm from Detroit to Muskegon and on. But I will tell you, Abby, we call it pop in Michigan. Okay, so
excuse me.
Yes, not soda.
I'm a good Texan. It's a Coke, even if it's a Dr. Pepper.
And look, I don't want to be all Pollyanna. I mean, politics is a blood sport, okay? I knew what I was signing up for when I put up my hand to run in this primary. I knew it was going to be a primary. Congresswoman Hillary Scholten and I, spent a lot of time chewing on it. She was a very close ally of mine in this race. She was with me on election night. And, we knew it was. And then she said, Haley, the reason you do these primaries, I've had a few of them, okay? I had one with Andy Levin in 2022, and that one was major. I mean, oh my gosh, the scion of Michigan Democratic politics. Now that one I won by 20 points. I mean, this is just American democracy. But Hillary did say to me, she said, look, you know how to do these primaries, you know how to bring people together when it's over. So I'm just doing it in the Haley way, I guess, in my way, not to talk about myself in third person.
I love that though. That's good.
I mean, I'm just
David does it all the time. It's fine. I come in and it's David Gura wants this, David Gura wants that.
Thank you, guys.
Let me look beyond.
David Gura has a question.
Let me look ahead to the challenge that Dr. Sayed's going to face here, and that's from Mike Rogers, the former congressman, and he talked about sort of how he sees this campaign playing out. Let's play a little sound from him, and I'll ask you about sort of the path forward here vis-a-vis that coming up.
to the vast majority of people across Michigan who do not want to throw their support behind a campaign filled with anger, divisiveness, calls for violence, and the views that are out of touch with your values, well, you have a home with us. The fight is far greater than just left versus right. The fight is for the very soul of our nation.
There's a former congressman sitting on a couch with his wife making that case. How do you respond to that? The way the Republicans are painting this is an example of there being an extremist candidate versus the more traditional American candidate. I mean, there's a lot of invective and insinuation here in the comments we've heard from, yes, Congressman Rogers, but from the president as well. What is your counsel for how Democrats in Michigan should respond to that?
Look, the parties exist, and Mike is in the MAGA Republican wing, and he's got to, answer for how he's going to lower costs for people, how he's going to deal with their rising healthcare costs. I'm going to tell you right now, everywhere I turn, I'm meeting, amazing Michiganders. I still am, because they just saw me all over their TV, for the last handful of months. And there's joy here for sure. Detroit's on the rise, Motor City's on the rise, but folks are, they're getting less money. I really mean that. I talked to people who've been unemployed on occasion. Actually, there was a gal who just brought me DoorDash, and we had a whole big confab last night about her situation. She was all happy. She's resilient, but she's like, I've been out of work for a year, and she had a stroke, a couple of years ago in 2021, and just trying to kind of connect in. And I know that's her individual story, but that individual story matters so very much, right? I mean, and that's always what I tried to do as a rep, is just, help that one person, and do it in ones and twos, and that works. So I think when you ask me that question about Rogers, he's got to figure out what case he's making to people on what he's going to do for them. I'm not out here trying to give him advice. I that's not my industry or my profession really. But, I did want to answer. And, Abdul has come out of a major rough primary, and, and look, he's going to be out there making, his case to voters too. It seems like he knew how to do it, because he just came out of this big one. So I don't, and there's certainly some questions, and voters will start voting in about a month's time. We get early vote here. So we'll see. And pay attention to the votes that get cast. We just have so much prognosticating in American politics. I mean, people were calling this one. I voted on at my polling location on primary day, and they were calling my race as I was coming out. Now, there was a swarm of press, Congresswoman, you're down 15 points. What are you going to do? I said, whoa, let's just get, I'm in this mode. Abdul says he's not a socialist. I condemn socialism, this and that. Again, not trying to, I don't really know Rogers. Okay. He went to Florida. I never served with him. Seems like he made a bunch of money. He's, like you said, he's sitting on the couch. So, maybe he's trying to go to the Senate now.
All right. Well, let me ask you about what you just referenced, where you're saying, I'm not a socialist. You said Mike Rogers needs to decide what he's for. But there's a little bit of that within the Democratic Party right now, right? We've got this next phase in the progressive versus moderate fight that's coming up, particularly in Wisconsin. You've been talking to us about how long you've been in Democratic politics, all your successes. You flipped the seat, you served your constituents, but you lost. Do you think that the Democratic Party is really taking these lessons to heart, or do you think they're continually making the same mistakes, especially in these primaries?
I wouldn't go into any of that. I mean, honestly, I think that we've just got this incredible, race that was just had. I think my coalition is awesome. I'm really proud of it. I won Detroit by 67% of the vote, but I wouldn't be getting into mistakes. I mean, people just want health care. Okay. I mean, I want to fix government. I want to make government services work better for people. I was chief of staff on the U.S. Auto Rescue. It was an emergency situation. My goodness gracious, that worked really well. An $80 billion managed bankruptcy of General Motors and Chrysler, saving 200,000 Michigan jobs, of which we were repaid on interest as the, government, as the American taxpayer was repaid on interest. I'm looking at our debt and our deficit, and I'm thinking, okay, well, why is our debt growing faster than our gross domestic product? Why is it growing faster than our economy? You know, I want to lessen our dependence on China to create jobs and lower costs. We got to focus on critical minerals. I did that with the CHIPS Act. You know, I'm a voice in the Democratic Party saying those things. And I think sometimes I get why you're asking the question, but one person doesn't define the Democratic Party. We are a big group. The Republicans are a big group, and then there's this independent chunk that just kind of swings. And we got to, honestly, at the end of my primary, I was saying, no American is my enemy. I mean, truly, I just, look, I'm there in the Congress. I mean, I talk to everybody, except for the one from Georgia, okay? But I don't want to poke her because she's tempestuous and she resigned, okay? But everyone else was by and large, you could talk to them. Duly elected member of Congress. I mean, I came in, I'd never served in Congress, and I got my first bill signed for early childhood education in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Christmas Eve, 2019, signed by Trump. A week after the first impeachment, he still signed it. Hey, that's America, baby.
Congressman,
we're going to leave it there. That's America, baby. I think it's a good way to leave. Really great to speak with you.
Thank you for coming on. Please enjoy some pop for us.
Yes,
I think we've
pop.
Just got coffee and water here this morning.
Cheers to you.
And good luck with everything. Thank you so much.
Great to speak with you. All right, joining us in the conversation now, we have Yale School of Management Executive Fellow, Bloomberg opinion columnist Scott Makunda, Abby Livingston still with us here from Puck News on set. Abby, let me turn to you quickly here. Just get your reaction. Your question was right at the heart of what I think a lot of people are wondering here.
She's been sitting at the knee of the old guard of the Democratic Party, and how she's handling herself is how the old guard does it, is you get out immediately, you start campaigning. My question is, across the spectrum, are we going to see that? Because we're seeing, at least on Twitter, if you've gotten online this weekend, there's some very sore winners and very sore losers commentating about this race.
And she issued a statement very quickly, as you pointed out. And it was a very conciliatory statement. Did that play out the way that you thought it might in light of the Bruton campaign that you mentioned?
It was really nasty, yeah.
I was surprised at the speed. But I think this is someone who grew up in the era of the 2008 general election, and this is very much the model Hillary Clinton set. And so it doesn't surprise me when I look back at it.
Yeah.
Gautam, I want to ask you the question that the Congresswoman just said she didn't want to get into, which fair enough, which is, she has all these Democratic credentials. She's young, she's spunky, she's drinking Coke on TV, and she seems like the kind of person that would resonate with voters. She has all these credentials, she flipped this seat, but she did lose. And does that go to a bigger issue we're seeing in these races where the establishment Democrats that Abby just talked about are not getting the job done, and why?
So, it does. There's no way to tell the story that doesn't involve problems for establishment Democrats, right? Particularly given the financial advantage that she had. But I don't want to overread this either, right? So you are also seeing races where establishment Democrats are doing just fine. Where in Virginia they ran the table. There's on Hawaii
yesterday,
primary. Yeah. So this is not a story of the DSA just sort of suddenly taking over the Democratic Party. This is a story of an extremely aggressive faction that has great appeal in primaries, and from what we can tell, much less appeal in generals. That's able to pick off certain races. That matters a lot, right? When the balance of power is as narrow as it is. But it's not a story of the entire Democratic Party being taken over either. That's a very different tale.
Abby, she was quick to say she's one person, one candidate. Don't extrapolate a lot about the kind of broader process from the way that this played out in Michigan. This is your daily work, though. You're looking for these trends. You're looking for indications of what a race like this might mean for the broader midterms. How do you think about that? The uniqueness of Michigan, the uniqueness in part because of the amount of money that flowed into it from outside groups. What, if anything, does it tell you about the way that these other races are going to shape out going into the midterms?
I'm putting Michigan in its own category.
You are.
Now, there's an incredible amount of confidence on the left that El Sayed and the progressives are going to come out, and it is this argument that basically Ted Cruz, Ronald Reagan have made on the reverse side. And then you've got the establishment saying, you've got to win over those Republicans and independents. And so this is such a strange race. It has shattered all of the conventions of a conventional Senate Democratic primary that I'm very agnostic on it, and I think this will only make sense after it's over.
Adam, I also want to ask you about the DSA itself and this word socialism, because one thing that I found talking to people who have normal jobs and don't talk about this day in, day out is the average American doesn't really understand what that means. And we're seeing Republicans kind of take that to their advantage, conflating it quite often with communism. According to Axios, the GOP is going to host a socialism telethon for the midterms. Do Democrats need to embrace this so that they can define it, or is it better to try to stay away from a word that a lot of voters find triggering and an automatic no, even if they don't quite fully understand what it means?
I'm not sure the DSA knows what socialism means, right? Which is one of these sort of weird thing that's going around. So I'm in this call from Sweden, where I'm staying for the summer, and Sweden is, in many ways often described as a socialist country, and it has more billionaires per capita than the United States does. So you can see some conflicts there, right? And the policy proposals, not of the DSA itself, which is kind of out there, but the policy proposals of people like Al-Sayed or AOC and things like that. In most of the world, we wouldn't call that socialist. We'd call it social democratic, which would be Germany or Sweden or Finland. And I think that the Democratic Party, right, is sort of dealing with a problem where there's a group of people in the party who are largely, representative of the, I have to say, like the blue bubble of sort of very highly educated sort of people who maybe don't speak that much to people outside of that bubble and don't really necessarily get how that's perceived. And that's sort of, I think, where that's most strikingly showing up is in Wisconsin with Hong, who, looks like the weakest nominee for a statewide race that I can see since Christina O'Donnell was running ads declaring she was not a witch.
That's right.
Oh, I'd forgotten about those ads. Those were excellent.
God, on this point, I think of the role of the DSA here, and there are so many candidates that I've heard in recent weeks saying that they maybe subscribe to some of the values the DSA espouses, but they're not members of the group. And I wonder sort of what's to be done about that. There is, as Christina was pointing out, I think a tendency here to kind of clump some of these candidates in with DSA. You point out the kind of ambiguity of their policy positions, who they stand for, how it's structured, even. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but it sounds like what you're counseling here is that maybe we should have a more nuanced conversation, and perhaps this is what's happening within the Democratic Party now, just about how some of those policy platforms could be brought in or re-brought into the Democratic Party more broadly.
I'm a professor. We should have a more nuanced conversation as just a macro that I hit for any question that you answer. But I think what we really need to do is twofold. One is we should say that, look, I would not count the establishment out. This is a huge phenomenon, and they are sort of scrambling to figure out how to make sense of it, and they may or may not succeed. Second, the argument that the DSA is making, and we should take it seriously, is that there are a bunch of unactivated voters who will get activated by their people who will come out to vote in much the same way that Donald Trump triumphed in 2016 and 2024. I'm not convinced that there's a lot of evidence supporting that, because the best data we have on 2024, for example, says that people who did not vote were slightly more likely to support Donald Trump than people who did vote. So what we are going to run that experiment, and the advantage they're going to have right now is that the baseline numbers for Democrats are so strong in this election that if, Rogers lost in a nail biter in 2024, 2026 is going to be like 3 to 4, maybe 5 points more Democratic. So if Abdul Sayed only underperforms by, let's say, 3 points, which is significant in most elections, he's still going to win. And so we should really, as we think through this, I think that the nuanced conversation has a lot to do with, like, who's getting attention, how much of that attention goes in the primaries, how much is the total dysfunction of the DCC, which is basically broke, and the central party, and how much of that will change once we get to the real media firestorm of 2027 and 2028 with the presidential election, when the people who set the tone for the Democratic Party are going to be running for the nomination. And I would put pretty high odds that, with the possible exception of AOC making a run, none of them are going to be DSA members or even closely affiliated with it.
Abby, before we end this, I want to pull back a little bit and talk about the president, his approval ratings, and what this means. Because it seems to me at this point you've got a very unpopular president, but now you've got Democrats kind of getting in their own way, which should be an easier battle for them they've had in the past. And when it comes to folks being leery about democratic socialism, these candidates they don't understand, and the polling on the president's war and the president's policy and the disapproval rating, the approval rating hovering around 38.5%. Where does that break?
So this kind of polling is so bad. I mean, I called one Democrat last week who I thought was going to be very nervous about Michigan, and this person said, I don't know if Trump's done falling in the polls. And so his problems could paper over a lot of Democratic flaws in these campaigns that may not be visible this cycle, but could be used as arguments for why it was a successful campaign. And so a president's approval rating like that solves a lot of problems for Democrats.
I think he's going to Ohio this week. I mean, how much currency does he have with Republicans now as a campaigner? There was talk at the beginning of this year that he'd be out every week campaigning for Republicans. Abby, do you think that he has as much currency as he thought he did in the 30 seconds
And do they want
left
him?
here?
Yeah.
I think it depends on where he goes. In 2018, he went to Texas, and there was some evidence that he may have hurt Republican voters in the Houston media market where it was all covered. And so I think it's very difficult to bring a president out with these sorts of numbers.
All right, Abby Livingston from Puck News and Guadamakunda joining us from overseas, where it looks like a lovely, lovely place. We're very jealous.
Summer vacation.
Helmus, and of course, a very smart professor. Thank you both so much.
Yes, thank you. All right, well, coming up here, President Trump declared a crime emergency in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. He surged the National Guard there. It's been 1 year since that happened, and a new Bloomberg analysis looks at the rate of successful federal prosecutions, a rather small rate of successes. That's going to come up next here on Bloomberg This Weekend.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Week, and I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's update you on today's top stories. Apple has reportedly been testing memory chips from China's CXMT across product lines, including iPhones and MacBooks. The Wall Street Journal is reporting Apple has held early talks with the company with the goal of using the components in some devices sold in China. That comes as Apple addressed memory chip crunch due to that AI boom. Federal rules, they do prevent U.S. companies from transferring technology to CXMT. And Verizon says it has fixed an issue that affected the cell phone service of several thousand U.S. customers yesterday afternoon. It did not provide a reason for the outage. Data tracking site Down Detector, it says the issue impacted hundreds of customers from other major wireless carriers, including AT&T and T-Mobile, whose calls couldn't get through. Now, Verizon says if you're still having issues, restart your device. And Paramount Skydance says it will release 30 movies a year in theaters if it acquires Warner Brothers Discovery. Bloomberg reporting the company has offered 3-year agreements to AMC Entertainment and Cineworld Group's Regal Cinemas, requiring it to release the films exclusively in theaters for at least 45 days. The films also would not be available to stream online for at least 90 days. Now, if Paramount does not fulfill that obligation, well, it could face some penalties. David and Christina.
Crucial issue over the course of this entire set of negotiations, even before that deal was announced. A lot of theater owners worried about this.
30 movies doesn't seem like that much to me, but maybe it is, I guess.
It is for them.
Yeah. Okay.
As well. Thank you, Lisa.
President Trump is still pushing claims that the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool was vandalized after losing his longtime ally, U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro. She openly refuted those claims and dropped criminal charges, admitting in court filings the damage was, in fact, from bad workmanship.
Well, it's been 1 year since Trump surged National Guard troops into the Capitol to reduce crime. In the weeks later, federal prosecutors charged 27 people with assaults on federal officers. But a Bloomberg Law analysis found most of those charges were dismissed. We spoke with Bloomberg Law editor-at-large, Keith Alexander.
So last August, the president sent in 400 National Guard troops to basically canvass Washington, D.C. in hopes of bringing down crime. Also sent in other federal troops, immigration officials, things of that nature, custom border people as well. And the idea was to really reduce crime. Now, remember, at this time, crime was already down year over year about 25%. Now, fast forward, going into a year later, crime is now up year over year, 2%, despite thousands of National Guard troops patrolling the streets of Washington, D.C.
What was the reaction to the surge in the city? I mean, I was living there at the time, and let's start with a case. Start with Sandwich Guy, who became like a little bit iconic. And it's easy to laugh at the specifics of the case, but this actually kind of ruined this guy's life in the end. Can you talk us through kind of that case and why it's being used in your article to kind of illustrate what this push to charge folks has done to both the system and these individuals?
Sure, Christina. A lot of your viewers may remember the Subway sandwich guy, Sean Dunn. This gentleman was arrested for throwing a turkey sandwich from Subway that he just purchased after leaving a D.C. nightclub at an officer. He was angry. He was frustrated. These officers were on the streets of Washington, D.C., and he just threw a sandwich at the officer. Well, he was arrested, and he was charged with a felony assault on an officer. Federal prosecutors tried to make that charge stick. They couldn't get a grand jury to indict, of course. So what they did was they lowered the charge to a misdemeanor. After he was arrested, right before he went to trial, he lost his job with the Department of Justice, and he went to trial, and of course, he was found not guilty of assault. I talked to Mr. Dunn. I was the first reporter to talk to Mr. Dunn after this whole ordeal, and his life, he says, is now in ruins. He has left the Washington, D.C. area. He's trying to find a job. He is thinking about suing the federal government for being dismissed without merit. He was denied unemployment insurance by the city of Washington, D.C. And he said that the arrest and people like him who've been arrested, it wasn't about charges and it wasn't about making reducing crime. Instead, he said it was about making a statement that the administration wanted to make a statement against the people of Washington, D.C.
Keith, I want to pull a thread there, which is you saw these kind of dramatic charges being leveled at him and then they were reduced. And you have done this analysis of folks who were charged since August of last year. Just walk us through those data as well, because this one anecdote is illustrative of a broader story here, that we've seen the government kind of walk back a lot of these charges.
That's right, Dave. You know, what I discovered, we did a year-long investigation, and what we learned was that 27 cases involving felony assault on an officer were charged in federal court. This charge, if people were found guilty, would have meant people would have spent years in prison. What happened after the first 2 months, defense attorneys pushed back and said, you are charging individuals with a crime of assaulting a federal officer when members of the National Guard are not federal officers. DC police, not a federal officer. These charges should not be federal charges. So what they did was they dismissed a majority of the cases. And what they did was they reduced the charges to misdemeanors in a lower court. They only got 4 convictions out of all these cases. And one case, they got went to actual trial. As you all know, that was the Dunn case. Mm-hmm. I spoke to so many people whose lives were completely disrupted. You know, it's interesting if you look at some of the charges that these people had. A lot of charges of people spitting on officers, charged with a felony assault. Kicking an officer, charged with a felony assault. All these cases were dismissed. Now, these are federal prosecutors out of Jeannie Pirro's office here in Washington, D.C. And we all know what just happened with the Washington pool that just happened, the dismissal of that case. All these coming out of Jeannie Pirro's office. So it's very interesting to see what's happening with these prosecutors. I talked to defense attorneys who said these prosecutors should not have been filing these cases the way they have in federal court. You saw that with the reflecting pool. Again, charge was dismissed. Prosecutors are saying they're doing with the best they can under the orders that was coming from on high, trying to get these indictments on felony charges.
What usually rises to level a felony assault, and are you seeing any pushback from the DOJ attorneys themselves who are having to deal with these very thin cases and trying to figure out what to do?
That's a great question, Christine. Here's the issue with these prosecutors is that they could be brought up on charges of ethical violations if they are filing charges that don't have merit, that the evidence does not support the charge. And so a lot of prosecutors, I've been told, have actually quit the U.S. Attorney's Office. This one case that's profiled in my story that your viewers can actually read was a woman who was charged at the National Zoo. She went into an employee-only entrance at the National Zoo. The woman suffered from PTSD and anxiety. She was surrounded by officers, and she told them that she had anxiety. They grabbed her. When they grabbed her, she spat on one and kicked him. She was charged with a felony assault. That prosecutor who handled that case dismissed the charge, sent it over to Superior Court, a lower court, and he resigned from the office. So a lot of these prosecutors are just saying, I'm not going to go through and do what I'm being told to do.
Keith, in the last minute we have here, I wonder sort of what's changed as a result of all of this, if anything. I think we were last in D.C. a couple of months ago. National Guard is still there. My sense is they're going to continue to be there. That's been renewed.
They just got some new hotel rooms.
Got some new hotel rooms as well. So is there any change that you've noticed here in terms of both the manpower on the streets and the way that prosecutors are looking at these cases?
That's a great question, Dave. Yes, what I did have noticed, there's about more than 4,000 National Guard officers now roaming the streets of Washington, D.C. For a minute there, we saw the National Guard members picking up trash on the streets of Washington, D.C. The Guard members will be here through January of 29. That's been the order by the president. So it looks like they're not going anywhere anytime soon. But also what's interesting, and I said this before, crime is now up despite having the National Guard members patrolling Washington, D.C.
Yeah, David, it's weird. Right before I left D.C. in January, it did feel like the crime rate had gone back up. And you couldn't explain it
that
because,
surge.
Yes, but the National Guard and the forces are deployed in very specific areas.
Targeted
so I think if
areas,
you don't live in those areas, it's almost like it has been pushed to those areas. Sure. It's almost been exacerbated in some folks.
Well, they're going to be there for a while.
I think so. But I live here now, so that's all right. Coming up next, Lisa Mateo with BT Dubs, and we promise no hot dogs
No
today.
hot dogs today. Take us with you no matter where you go. You can watch us on TV, Bloomberg TV, Bloomberg Radio, stream us at Bloomberg.com.
Or your hot dog cart. All right, we're going to try this again. Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend, or BT Dubs. I'm Christina Ruffini with David Gura, and Lisa Mateo has some stories we might have missed this week. And Lisa?
Try it again.
No hot dogs this time.
No hot dogs. We're not doing hot dogs.
Okay.
How about concerts? You guys have been to a number of concerts. You pay a lot for tickets, right?
I don't, which is why I don't go to a lot of them. They're so expensive.
Yeah, they're
really
expensive. Okay,
yeah.
so that's the kind of the crux of this story. So this is in the Wall Street Journal. It says artist crowd pleaser, $20 tickets for shows. So it turns out artists like Coldplay, Olivia Rodrigo, they're offering these tickets that are like $20.
That's great.
So Coldplay did it. They're called Infinity tickets. Olivia Rodrigo called it Silver Star tickets. Even Charlie XCX, she's going to do something like that. To keep the resellers away, though, there's certain rules you have to apply by, okay? The tickets have to be picked up at the box office.
You got to go.
You got to go there, and you don't know where you're going to sit until the day you go there.
Interesting.
So those are things, but they sell out fast. And that's something. But it's not new. I mean, Kid Rock has been doing this. Garth Brooks. The Rolling Stones have this program called Lucky Dip that they've been doing. To kind of help people. Like, they want them to enjoy their music, but they need to make it a little bit affordable, too, at the same time.
Someone in my household eager to see Olivia Rodrigo playing at the Barclays Center in a few months. Look at the ticket prices, $739 each. What? $786, $854. It's been a hard conversation to have for one ticket. And these are not great seats. They're seats within the arena, but good to know about this.
But this is the same thing with like World Cup prices, where you get these crazy fans that just can never see these games, and that's not fair. You know, kids should get to go see their favorite artists.
I know. I paid. Well, that's a deal because I paid $250 a pop for Garth Brooks for my daughter.
Brooks.
No, not Garth Brooks. It was
Friends in Low Places.
No. Garth Brooks.
His alter ego.
Zach Bryan
Zach,
at MetLife.
All right.
That's who it was.
A generation away.
I'm telling you, it's expensive out there. Okay, so you mentioned going to these things, you concerts with your kids. When you go to the concerts, you buy them like hoodies.
There's always a push for that. There's always a push for that at games as well.
Always
you
a
got to
hoodie
remember it.
associated with everything. This is in the Washington Post. Teen hoodies are testing their closets, limits, and their parents' patience. Okay, so if you've ever seen, I know my daughter's closet, lined up, stacked hoodies right across. And the problem is that they're worrying about how they're going to store these things, okay? Because the closets are running out of space. Yeah. They're bulky. They're big. You know, how are you going to fold them? How are you going to fit them? And now these young teens are going to college, and so parents are like, how are you going to fit all these in a dorm room?
Some agitation on Lisa Mateo's part here.
This is a personal story that Lisa has selected for reasons we don't really need to get into.
And what do you do? So they have like all these solutions. There's Facebook groups out there for this.
To get rid of them.
For people how to do it.
Yeah.
My daughter says she's taken half.
Okay.
She's taking half the hoodies.
Yep.
And then she comes back from break, brings those back, and then
it'll be the
digs the other
fall,
one
get a
back.
new set.
See, you get a new set.
That's
it seems
smart.
like fresh, brand new.
That's for like such
Bat mitzvahs, it's like the gift you
Yes,
got.
I was just
really?
going to say.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Is it a bat mitzvah if you don't get a hoodie? I don't know.
Oh, I didn't know this.
It's a thing. You
I
go
also
down the Jersey
saw-
Shore, you get a hoodie.
There you go. And I saw in your video there the old Goat USA.
You know that brand.
Boy, do I.
See? This was a conversation
You probably
last
don't know
night.
any Goat USA.
I have no idea what you're
Add
talking
that to your
about.
wardrobe. I don't know any either.
So I did have so many hoodies in my teens. It's not something I have as an adult, but my parents who moved from Colorado still have like 2 full drawers of hoodies that I just left there when I went to college and never.
They haven't given them.
Be warned, Lisa Mateo. The promises of hoodie, carriage may not happen.
This followed her Hot Topic goth stage that we still need proof of.
Yes, we do need proof of that.
Drawing it all together.
Mom and Dad,
Saturday
hop
and Sunday.
on it.
It's a show across 2 days. If you're just tuning in today, you've missed a lot of the inside jokes, but tune in on Saturdays.
It's a wonderful
as well.
time. It's a wonderful time.
It is.
All right, let me take you from hoodies to clothing you can wear to keep you incognito. Okay, let me explain. All right, this is from The Guardian. Adversarial clothing are garments designed to confuse facial recognition systems about to go mainstream. So let me explain. These are carefully designed arrangement of shapes, colors, repeated patterns, and what they do is they throw off computer vision systems. So if you're listening on radio, it's kind of hard to describe these patterns. I don't know. How would you guys describe
Well,
it?
like you're having a visual migraine.
Yes.
It's like you've got like a visual aura.
And that's what it does to these these visual systems that are out there kind of tracking people. So that's why they're wearing this. It's a little odd, but it's kind of with fashion. I mean, it's how you speak. It's a form of expression. So they're kind of voicing out their concerns against
like
people
we're talking about
them.
concert halls. I think now when you go to a lot of concert venues, you're being kind of photographed.
Especially one in New York had some controversial moments for allegedly using facial recognition, and people don't want to be on these lists. I mean, I think it's really interesting, and I think it's interesting how they're trying to make them wearable too, right? As you've put these up here, they're all different, and some are colorful and some are digitized, and that in itself seems like a bit of a fashion statement, especially the story we did earlier this week about camo becoming big. It's a different kind of camo.
See? It's a different camo. I love that.
Tying it all together.
Vacation time.
Vacation time.
Oh,
Boy,
David Gura, here it is. Martha's Vineyard.
Good morning, 92.9 Boston. To our listeners in the greater Boston area, to the top of Mount Katahdin, as Tom Keene would say.
Okay. You rolled that out very smoothly.
No comment. Lisa.
One of David Gura's favorite hotspots.
Yes.
Also, the Obamas have a house there, so
do.
it is a popular place. This is from Bloomberg. Martha's Vineyard ticks drive tourists to scrap $12,000 rentals.
Yeah.
Ticks a big problem.
They are, and deer ticks had been an issue there for a very long time. There were a lot of deer. It's something immediately noticeable, but now there are these other smaller ticks.
Yes, the Lone Star ticks.
Which transmit this alpha-gal syndrome, which gives you a meat allergy.
You
can't eat meat, dairy products. And it's been really wild to watch, how that spread. You hear about it anecdotally, and then if you go to shops or restaurants, they sell food items that don't have those items in there.
And they call it alligal, like they call it that on the menu. It's crazy.
But can you not go to your fancy beach without like trudging through the tick-laden bushes? They're just everywhere.
Very quickly.
This specific one is everywhere.
No, and the Lone Star and ticks come after you, unlike deer ticks. Like they are.
They're aggressive.
Sad that our radio listeners can't watch me doing my
Thank you for, radio listeners really missed that illustration.
People are canceling their vacations. So, not David Gura, though. Not David Gura.
Lisa, thank you. Thank you for joining us, all of you, on
I'm
Bloomberg
going to
this
London.
weekend.
I'm not dealing with ticks there.
Join our colleagues in Asia this evening when global markets kick off trading, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm David Gura.
I'm Christina Ruffini here with Lisa Mateo. We'll be back with you next weekend. Stay tuned.